So I am going to call the meeting to order and ask that Carlin take a roll call.
Don takes the roll.
Oh, Don takes the roll call. Sorry, Don.
We don't need it because no one's online.
What?
We don't need it if no one's online. We don't need a roll call,
Okay, I just
right?
put check marks
I think so.
next to names I see. So Suresh, you're not here.
Lois, you want that up?
What?
Want that up right now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
I mean, if you want to do a roll call, if that's easier, but
No, if it's easier
I
for,
believe that was.
yeah, if it's easier for,
specific to-
you're right, we're not legally required to do a roll call if none of the members are online. So, okay, so,
We'll have to go back and-
so since we have established that there's a quorum, we can just call the meeting to order. I'm going to start by asking if there's any public comment and remind people that public comment is limited to 10 minutes. And it's limited to items that are not on the agenda. I don't see any members of the public in the room. And Anthony, are there any online?
There's no online.
Okay. Then we can move past public comment and to give our chair an opportunity to participate in the highlight of the evening, which is going to be our discussion of the guidelines. It's been suggested that we take the agenda a little bit out of order and start with the minutes and see if we can do our housekeeping with the minutes. So I'm going to ask Don and Carlin.
Thank you, Lois. All right,
Become interchangeable.
we're getting there. We're looking at the minutes for the FinCom meeting of October 24th, the joint FinCom Carlisle and Concord minutes of October 24th, and the FinCom minutes of November 7th. Madam Chair, what's your pleasure? Shall I take them all three together, or shall I take them one at a time?
Does anyone have any comments on any of the minutes? They were all circulated in the packet in advance of
Oh,
the
meeting.
meeting.
I only have one comment. They were excellent minutes.
Thank you.
Just going to make the same comment.
Thank you very much.
Really
Appreciate that.
I wasn't at all three, so. I
You're
can-
welcome to vote or not. It's
Even if I'm
entirely
not
up to
there?
you.
All right, cool.
Oh, yeah, and actually, that's something, you don't have to abstain
Oh,
if
cool.
you weren't present at a meeting. You're allowed to vote on the minutes even if you weren't actually present at the meeting.
That's great to know. Thank you.
So, if there are no comments in any of the specific minutes, why don't we take all three of them together?
Good. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented for the October 24th Finance Committee meeting, October 24th, 2024, joint Carlisle and Concord Finance Committee meeting, and the November 7 Finance Committee meeting? Could I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
All right. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, let me get that down. It's moved by Dee, second by Greg. All right. Now, we do need to do a roll call? No, we just,
Well,
what,
I see a
Anthony?
couple of, I see.
technically,
Oh,
sorry. Let's just do a roll call,
Well,
so
he
it's.
says that Kathy's online.
I just promoted Kathy.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
Kathy's on, so we do need to do a roll call. Now, let me make sure Kathy knows where we are, what we're doing here.
Kathy, we just took a motion to approve the three sets of minutes. We could have some discussion on the motion before we vote, if you have any thoughts about any of the minutes as submitted in the packet.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay, then we can proceed with the vote.
Okay, hold on, I'm going to bring up the roster here. Peggy Briggs,
Approve.
Kathy Cuoklo,
Approve.
John Garofalo,
Approve.
Greg Gariello. Yep. Me, Don Kupka, yes. Lindsay Bliss,
Yes.
Bea Ortner,
Yes.
Carlin Reed,
Aye.
Paul Rodriguez,
Yes.
Sri Tupel,
Yes.
Lois Rossoff,
Yes,
unanimous.
so the minutes are approved unanimously.
Thank you all.
We can proceed to the guidelines discussion.
Should be on. This much.
I think we'll do that. Let's proceed to the guidelines discussion rather than the liaison reports in case we need to shortchange the time on the liaison reports, because the the guidelines discussion is really our primary item, agenda item for today. So I'm going to ask Lindsay if she can lead that discussion.
Okay, great. And I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so I'm going to spend a little time walking through the 4 scenarios that I've developed. I realize this might be a little bit hard to see for some people, especially those watching here in the room. And I can make it a little bigger as we go one by one through them. But here, I'll provide an overview of kind of why I decided to develop 4 scenarios instead of just one, and what I was trying to achieve with each scenario. And basically, this gives kind of a range of options for us to consider and to debate and to discuss, and hopefully we can get to an answer we all feel comfortable with. So let me walk through each of the 4 scenarios. Oh, and let me just back up one thing. I think my main goals with the middle 2 scenarios, which are kind of, you know, a little bit of a hybrid of 1 and 3, but the middle 2 scenarios, my goals were to try to treat the town and schools very fairly and very equally. That was really important to me. And then not to penalize any of the operating units for things that they don't have much control over, that are that are highly variable and difficult to forecast. So to try to figure out a way to recognize that there are some expenses that are difficult to manage. So with that, let me just kind of jump in. So scenario 1, and let me see if I can zoom in here and make this a little bit easier to see. And by the way, we'll maybe I'll just go kind of toggle between pages here. Yeah, let's go to scenario 1. So scenario 1, the goal was to, I really thought this would look a little bit bigger on the screen. Scenario 1, the goal was to give the operating units the amount from the fiscal year 26 forecast that they provided in October. So when I kind of put in all of the numbers, thanks to the middle school cost savings, the total, you know, operating increase for spending subject to guidelines came in at 3.57%. So I thought that this, because it was under 4%, because it wasn't that far off from the metrics that we developed a few months ago, the upper range of which was 3.4%, I thought this was a scenario worth including. This is what they're saying. They were forecasting in October that they would see for expense increases, so I thought this was worth including as a scenario. So if we decided to go with an increase of 3.57%, the way that would break down is a 3.99% increase for CPS, not including the middle school savings, a net increase for CPS of 2.92%, so that, you know, that's including the middle school savings, a CCRSD increase of 4.42%, and I can go into a little more detail about why that's a little bit higher, and then a town increase of 3.9%. CCRSD, you know, when you dig into the numbers, 13% of their operating budget that's subject to guidelines is comprised of these out-of-district tuitions. And as we heard from the school committee in the last couple of months, these have become these are unpredictable, and they've become kind of a big part of the budget, especially for CCRSD. I think at CPS, what we've heard from Lori is that she's done she's worked really hard to bring a lot of special education back in district, which has kept that number a smaller percent of the overall budget. But for CCRSD, that's where there's less control over what's going on in Carlisle, right? So, like, I think at their elementary school level, I think it's been like less successful, I think, coming up that way. So it's a bigger part of the CCRSD budget, so while it's only a few percentage points for CPS, it's bigger for CCRSD, and it's actually going to be big next year. So their increase is a little bit bigger. So total spending subject to guidelines goes up 3.57% in scenario 1. So there's nothing really too interesting about that one that we need to get into. So scenario 2A and 2B are the ones where it's going to take me a little longer to walk through. So in scenario 2A and in 2B, I'm applying preliminary guideline targets to the underlying operating costs only. So I'm saying that there are certain items that I'm going to treat separately. So I'm going to treat middle school cost savings separately. I'm going to treat out-of-district tuition increases separately. We just talked about those. And CCRSD and CPS Tier 1 capital, I'm kind of removing for the purpose of what I'm going to apply the preliminary guideline target to. So in other words, I'm saying these are things that are happening that I'm not going to, I'm going to kind of add back after and then say, like, let's not apply the guideline to them. Let's take those separately and add them back at the end. So it means that whatever the middle school savings is what it is. We don't need to apply a guideline to that, right? I'm saying the out-of-district tuition increases are what they are. Let's go with like what the schools are forecasting those to be and allow that to happen. And Tier 1 is what it is. Those are just buses. I'll describe that. It's 2 buses at CPS and 2 buses at CCRSD that they buy each year. So they always buy those, and those have a little bit of inflation associated with those. Let's add those back in at the end and not apply a guideline to them. So does that methodology make sense? So those are the things I'm saying. So the reason I exclude the buses is the town doesn't have Tier 1 that we're talking about tonight. Oh, did everyone catch that I haven't talked about Tier 1 capital for the town? That is a big thing I should have mentioned at the beginning. I haven't done a guideline for town Tier 1 capital. I'm treating that completely separately this year. I think those capital discussions are still ongoing. There was discussion even a few nights ago that shouldn't we think of it as a % of assets instead of a % of income? I think there's a lot of discussion about how we should manage and budget for Tier 1 capital going forward. So we've left it out of the guidelines discussion this year.
So.
Sorry, I should have backed up and said that at the beginning.
So, scenario 1
So
does
scenario,
not include Tier 1 capital.
and none of these scenarios include Tier 1 capital.
Okay.
So if you remember last year, we had town Tier 1 going up 26%, right? And that went from like 1 point something to 2.2 or 2.18 million. This year, I don't know what's going to happen with that. Maybe it'll go up by another few percent. Maybe this capital guidelines committee will decide it should be 2% of our operating budget or a certain % of total assets. I don't know where that's going to come out. So like, I'm treating that as that's separately happening, and that next meeting's happening in December.
So if I understand you correctly, at the December meeting, we would find out how those costs that have been externalized will be or not be? Or,
Yes.
and then how does that influence how we look at
Right.
setting a guideline?
Right. So I think this capital planning process, they'll decide kind of how best to budget for it. There will still be there's always a warrant article for capital that's separate from the operating budget anyway, right? So we'll have the chance in public hearings to kind of hear about these things and vote on what we think of their capital requests. Like we have done for the schools, and we have a voice there on both. So we'd still have the voice with the town as to whether or not we agree with what they end up putting forth in a warrant article. But and if you guys disagree, that's fine. But I think that makes more sense, given that discussion is very open right now about what to do about it.
So just one question about that, which is, if it's an out-of-district placement, is that a capital cost, or is that part of the operating budget?
Oh, so that's separate. Those are part of the operating budget. So the
Yeah.
things that I was talking about excluding from the operating budget, or excluding from my approach to guidelines, not excluding, but not penalizing and just treating them separately, they're still going to be part of the operating budget,
Okay,
are the middle school savings,
Okay.
which is something we said is just going to be kind of taken off after, let's treat it separately. That's a savings to the town overall. The middle school savings, let's treat it separately. It is what it is. The out-of-district tuition increases, which are part of the operating budget, but I'm saying, and you guys can disagree, these are all just scenarios, I'm saying they're unpredictable, they kind of are likely to go up more than what we would give for a guideline, like, let's treat them on their own. And then the buses, which are the tier one that's included in the operating, they're in the operating budget. So let's treat those separately too, because that's
Okay.
for fairness reasons almost.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I don't know if that one's working, sorry. Just to clarify,
Yeah.
that statement, treat them separately. So say we had a budget of $1 million.
Yeah.
And the out-of-district costs were $100,000, right? So 10% of it. You're gonna take that out, apply the guideline to that 900, and then you're saying, you keep saying put back in.
Okay, yeah, so
So-
let
so I
me
just
walk
want
you
you to
through one of
clarify
the
that, yeah.
calculations. Let's go to CCRSD because they have the biggest impact by this. Okay, so I'm looking at 2A, if anyone's kind of has this in front of them, 2A and CCRSD. So I'm just gonna walk kind of through it, and you can poke holes in this, because, you know. All right, so we have, I start with what was approved at town meeting last year for fiscal year '25 is 23.15 million. And then I have their, I say request, it was really their forecast that they provide in October. So if we gave them that forecast, that's a 4.42% increase. Then the next few lines here are, let me see if I can make this bigger. That's better. Okay. The next few lines here, 61 through 66, are tier one capital. So I kind of figure out what was fiscal year '25, not including tier one capital. So 2 buses at 150,000 each approximately, and then is this right? Yeah, 2 buses at 170 each in fiscal year '26. So the forecast, so I have, now I can get a fiscal year '25 without tier one and a fiscal year '26 without tier one. So that gives you kind of, all right, I took out tier one capital. Then I went down to CCRSD out-of-district tuition. Their fiscal year '25 forecast as of now is 3.6 million. Their fiscal year '26 forecast is 3.9 million. That's a $290,000 increase. And you can see, this is almost 4 million out of a total like 23 or 24 million budget. This is a big part of their budget. So that's an increase of 8%, almost 300,000. So then I said, okay, so what would fiscal year '26 look like if you don't include tier one capital? So I took it out, and then, so I'll explain that in a minute. And if out-of-district tuitions had not increased at all, if they had been 0. So so I basically take the fiscal year 2025 without tier one capital. I treat out-of-district tuitions as flat. And, I take fiscal year '26, not including tier one capital. I treat out-of-district tuitions as flat. So I kind of remove that increase of 290,000. And so their underlying forecast for operating costs, not including those 2 items, is 3.06. So what they were forecasting in October was a 4.42% increase, but when I take out those 2 things, it's 3.06. Does that make sense? So it's actually lower. It's actually pretty low compared. So then I apply the preliminary guideline target. So way up at the top here, I have this input of preliminary guideline target. So the preliminary guideline target that I'm using in scenario 2A is 3.4%, which is at the upper end of those metrics we talked about a couple of months ago. Okay? So if you apply that target, it's actually more than what they need, right? Because I just said 3.06 is what they were projecting. So I applied the 3.4% to that underlying operating costs. Then I add back the increase in out-of-district tuitions of 290,000. Then I add back the tier one capital in 2026 of 340,000. And then that gets you to their real preliminary guideline, because I've added those things back, and it's 4.76%. So that's so there's, and it's more than what they requested. So 2B actually takes that back, says, okay, it's more than what you requested, let's just give you, so 2B, I'll just scroll down. The only difference between 2A and 2B is CCRSD. I just take back that amount. So it brings it back down to the 4.42% that they requested.
Can I ask a quick question about this? So we did this in the Coast Guard associated with energy money.
Oh, okay.
Because energy fluctuations were ruining people's budgets, and we stripped it out and gave people operational money and then energy money, completely separate. And this is exactly the same thing they were trying to do with the out-of-district tuition. Yet, in order to do that in a way that I think makes a little bit more sense, is you wouldn't just strip the additive portion to calculate the budget. You'd strip the total and pull it aside, and then figure out what that increase is without it in there, and then look at it separately, because one of the benefits would be that it's basically paying at fixed costs.
Yeah.
So if it goes up, we have to pay for it. But if it goes down, like, they don't necessarily receive the benefit of decreased costs.
It
Be-
went down a couple of years ago, didn't it? Less? Yeah,
I have no idea.
it actually did go down.
But that was a way that we controlled that interaction in a way that would make
Treat them
sense.
separately.
So you treat them separately.
Yeah, you don't ever kind of put them back together.
And you never put them back
Yeah.
together. And it's a way that you could articulate it, saying, and I've heard the same thing that you had in these meetings, saying, this is our biggest risk. We can't plan it. We can kind of anticipate what it's going to be for the next year, but we can't look out, we can't forecast or anything like that. It's like, okay, you don't have to. But we can give you the, I don't know, guidance on drivers that you actually can control, and then hold them to that.
Hold them to that for whatever is in that.
Whatever's
bucket.
in that bucket, and not necessarily the regulation required out-of-state tuition bucket that they can't necessarily control.
So where does the money come from for the things they can't control?
Well, that would be, they can probably estimate what that is going to be for the next year.
Right, and they tried
But
to.
they can't if they have somebody out of district all of a sudden moves in, and then there's a $400,000 ad. So it's not necessarily predictable. Anyway, I just kind of wonder, how do you strip that out? Where do you put it back in, and how do you evaluate that?
So I guess at that point, then you just decide who bears the risk. Do we bear the risk in
Okay.
the school?
Okay.
Or do we bear the risk at the town level?
Okay.
And that is a more, I think, a palatable discussion of at the town level.
Yeah.
And, can be used for free cash or however way you fund differences in expectations, but you don't necessarily cancel a choir program to pay for somebody you didn't anticipate to come, which is what they said in the town meeting.
Right,
So,
or they might have to.
Yeah.
Depending on how it's
depending on how it
structured.
works, yeah, that's right.
So
Oh,
maybe
interesting.
on your summary sheet, we have a new column.
Yeah.
Well,
Unpredictable?
I mean, you're like 95% there.
Yeah, yeah.
It just changes the way that the percentage is calculated.
Yeah.
And I think that
It's a little more accurate, just the way you're talking about.
it allows, and I think the way that they're putting in their proposal, that percentage, because they're trying to speak to the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So giving them less money, you can say, we're inheriting that risk, you don't have to, so here's your percentage based on the fact that we are now inheriting that risk of the
Wait a minute,
town.
who's the "we" that is?
The
in
town.
here?
Still need
the
to
town.
give them- I don't know, though. Well, yeah, what do you?
It's just a point of what I've done in the past
Yeah.
for an entity having the same kind of issue. Don't have to
It's a
do it.
really- No,
just
it's a really
bringing it up.
interesting way to look at it. It's just, when you have that remainder that's unpredictable, who should be accountable for that? And should it be, if it's a school issue, should it be the school then that has to, in its budget, pull away some other things so that they can manage that? I don't know. I just,
Yeah, it's a good question.
but this is an interesting approach. I don't think we've ever done this before, have we? Looked at,
I would say we could look at it the same way we look at other outside of guidelines spending for the town. Health insurance, for example. If we don't know what that's going to be, there's a risk there, and we have to find that from somewhere.
interesting.
To your point, though, Paul, the schools are 2/3 of the total spending. So if we were to say, well, we're going to freeze the school budget and shift all of the risk over to the town budget, there's
It's a sizable
huge
risk.
swings.
It's a sizable risk. Yeah.
So I think there's something else. And there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. I really like that we're thinking about outside of guidelines spending for the uncontrollables. But then we have to come full circle back to the conversation we're going to have later about policies around free cash and the headroom we have under the levy limit. And so that may then inform, if we put certain things, call them, untouchables, the other guideline for the controllable may be less than level services at some point. I could imagine that happening. So we just have to be mindful of this all the way around, how this would play out.
It could be less than level services either way, whether we pull that into a different column or not.
Yeah, I think I'm bringing that up because I think at this stage of our process, we're thinking, well, we'll apply the guideline to the controllable cost and let the rest be what it is. But that guideline that total may end up being unpalatable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see Pat has her hand up online. Pat?
There we go. I like pulling out both the Tier 1 capital and the out-of-school district costs for another reason. Lindsay, you casually referred to perhaps those out-of-area costs are not Concord costs. They're Carlisle costs that are part of a function of the way the Carlisle Elementary and Middle School deal with the population of kids who can't be in those schools. If we remove them from the operational budget, could we have a dialogue where we actually identify those students? Is this a fair thing to talk about? And allocate those costs to Carlisle differently than Concord? Same thing with the buses. Are the buses Concord buses, Carlisle buses? What are we doing there, right? If we pull them out, can't we have that conversation with Carlisle? Or is just that not kosher?
I don't think that's a question we can answer because the cost sharing between Carlisle and Concord for CCRSD is under an agreement.
Right, there's a regional agreement, so I don't think you can, I don't know it good enough, and Dr. Hunter's on, but I think that would be an issue.
Yeah.
And the way that they manage it now is just by student population. So every year we get a different allocation based on the student population. I think that's a prearranged agreement.
Yeah.
And they don't go into the composition of that student.
Yeah. And to see if this was, this kind of approach was even possible, we need to look at that agreement. But my guess would be, the answer will be, that's not the allocation metric that's in the agreement. I think it's pretty straightforwardly the percentage of students coming from each town. So I don't think there's a way, not even speaking to whether or not we'd want to do it that way, I don't think we could do it that way unless we opened up the agreement for renegotiation. That may not even be possible.
Yeah, the superintendent said, no, there's a regional agreement, so you can't split it up
Yeah.
other than what the regional agreement was.
Yeah,
which-
that was my
yeah,
thinking.
Okay, I'm just trying to find ways of business not as usual. Okay, so that's why I raised my hand and, talk
Well,
about it.
that's good.
I think it's it's an interesting idea. I'm sure we can't do it under the current agreement, but Lindsay, how did you come up with that concept? Is that have you seen numbers that show a disparity in the overall special ed population compared to the total high school population in terms of weighting?
That comment I made was from a comment that Julie made, or no, actually Lori made at either one of these meetings or at a meeting we had.
Okay, I think we should ask.
We can ask her for more
Ask the
detail
school
on that.
administration to maybe take a look at that, because I just want If it's true, it's one thing. If it's not true, I'd want to expunge the
Yeah.
idea completely, because
Yeah.
it's a little icky.
Right, it is. So, sorry for bringing that.
But so, yeah.
I have a question, and some portion of the expenses related to the out-of-district tuitions ends up being reimbursable by the state.
Yes.
And how does state, and I know that that's an issue for a number of reasons. They don't reimburse at 100%,
Yeah.
and the reimbursement tends to be off time sync. You know, they're always behind. They're getting reimbursed. This is oversimplification, and Carrie can correct me, but
Well, I have here, I'm putting this kind of slide up here. I think it explains
Okay.
a little more, but go ahead.
But it could even be in a different fiscal year that they get the money
Yes.
back. So how does the inflow from the reimbursements affect this?
I think cash flow is a little different from budgeting.
No, cash flow,
right? So
yeah, I get
I
that.
think, but we asked, Eric and I asked for Julie to provide an overview of the headwinds related to out-of-district costs for CCRSD, and so I've got that up here.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things she said was that reimbursements haven't kept pace with rising tuition. So, yes, there are reimbursements, but, the tuition's gone up more than the reimbursements.
Do they have does the state have you might not know this, does the state have a standard amount that they reimburse? Whether there's a
Yeah,
complexity
they have a
or
formula,
not?
and we went through it in October. There's some, if you look in the packet there, she has there were some pages Julie provided about how it works, but, yeah, there's a reimbursement formula, plus there's the transportation portion, which
Yeah.
that reimbursement has been really inconsistent as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and the state can reset the percentage.
That
so
they reimburse.
That adds
Yeah.
another level of unpredictability to how much money's coming back, because
Right.
they may have a stated value of reimbursing a higher percentage, but then make their own budgeting decision in that particular year, they're going to reimburse a lower percentage. So it really is a moving target and a real issue for the schools to deal with.
And what hit home for me is how kind of one student can kind of derail things,
Yeah, that
right?
was
Because
an eye-opener.
tuition for one student could be 6 figures, you know?
So, Lindsay, going back to the slide for scenario 2A,
Yeah.
is it really just C77 that needs to change to include the base amount that
Yeah,
Paul
kind
was
of.
talking to?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what can you just plug that in right now and just,
So I think there's a couple
What's that?
formulas, yeah, that I think, I just think I could mess it up
but
if I
it's,
do it
but
really
it's,
quick.
it's actually C77, right, is adding back the
I
increase.
think you're right there.
Adding back the increase,
Right.
instead of, like, I want to take
Oh,
it
you also
out of
need to take it out.
25.
You also need to take it out.
Take it out of
You also need
25,
to take
take
it
it out
out.
of 26, yeah.
Yeah. Is that, can we do that to get a sense? Like, just duplicate this whole sheet, and can you get a sense of, I don't even know
As long
what
as you
is-
let me take it off sharing, so I don't have to do it in front of everybody. But yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
you
know what
can-
a sense
you
of the base number is? Let me
Yeah,
ask that question
so,
first.
okay, so the CCRSD in fiscal year '25 was 3.6 million. It's going up, they're expecting to go up to 3.9 million.
Okay, so that's the forecast number. So that
yes.
whole number needs to come out, is what
Yes.
we'd say. Okay, gotcha.
I have a question for Anthony.
Just take that and subtract.
When we talked with the select board and touched on this notion of creating reserves or creating funds out of free cash when it hits a certain level, could we create a buffer for something like this out of the surprise for out of district, and then it builds back up in future years when we don't have any surprises?
We could create any stabilization funds that we wanted to.
Okay, all right.
Doesn't the school have a little bit, what is it, the?
Excess
E&D, right?
Yeah.
They have a little bit in there, right? So that's a buffer for this as well as, and I don't remember, I think that was pretty high, if I remember correctly, that they have.
We do have it, but,
I see,
More than 5%.
Oh, are you talking about CP?
yeah, I see Laurie has her hand up. Dr. Hunter, did you have a question or did you have a comment?
I was willing to comment on a few of the questions you had, if that's helpful. I
Please.
heard the Carlisle piece and little bit else, but that's up to you. I just wanted to let you know Anthony
Sure,
promoted.
sure. I think
on here.
it's certainly relevant.
Yeah, in terms of Carlisle, we're working, there's no blame here, right, with Carlisle. The student needs are what's driving things. They're small, so their ability to build programs out and things are at a very different scale. We're collaborating together and having some really thoughtful discussions. It's the same story. We're all facing, different and growing student needs. So just wanted to name that. I think you already covered the regional agreement covers how the formula has to be split. The assessments are broken out at the bottom of the budget when we get to the total. We can't splice and dice what's causing what or where costs are coming from, other than at the aggregate number. I'm really impressed with the level of thoughtful discussion you're having about some of the challenges that we face with out-of-district special needs. And while we tried to forecast for you, though, for next year, that's the best we know based on what the needs are right this minute. I heard you name, and I'm just validating, it's the surprises that are harder, which is what happened last spring and is carried into these discussions we're having for 25 and 26, move-ins or student needs changing dramatically. It's that. You just talked about any reserves that we have. We have circuit breaker. That's the state's special education subsidy. Best practice is to carry over a year's worth. We're up over $1 million right now, but that's because the costs are so high. We have already told the school committee for FY25 we need to dip into that to get through this year, probably at about $200,000. We're hoping that's as far as we need to go. We will get another round of circuit breaker as we go into FY26. It may be about the same amount because the out-of-district costs are similar, but if we keep dipping into one-time funds for recurring costs, that gets really, obviously you run out of space at some point. So you're talking about all the right things. I'm just really grateful that, Lindsay, you've done a great job sort of outlining this and setting up the discussion. So I'll stay on in case I can be of any other help.
Thank you.
So any other questions were about the out-of-district or the approach? It will go back up to the summary for 2A, and then we can go to 2B. And like I said, the only difference between 2A and 2B is that in 2A, we end up giving CCRSD more, using this methodology, more than they kind of forecasted. So in 2B, we take it back. So maybe I'll land on 2B for a second. Given that I know we probably won't land on giving them more than they forecasted. So
No.
probably. We'll see what people think. But so in 2B, when we apply the 3.4%, again, that's the upper end of the FinCom metrics. So that is also, everything's up for discussion. So that's the upper end. And we can talk about a scenario Carlin wanted to run that's related to this. But the 3.4%, when you apply that just to those underlying costs, it gets you to this 3.81% increase for CPS, not including the middle school savings, which goes down to 2.474% if you include the middle school savings. So that would be their guideline, including the middle school savings. And then CCRSD at 4.42%, which is what they forecasted, and the town at 3.4%. So down here in row 19 is how the guideline compares to their forecast they provided us in October. So in this scenario, the guideline would require them to kind of go back to the drawing board and reduce expenses by $83,000 at CPS, and then at the town by $163,000. And so, so that's those scenarios. Now, those are kind of, they don't take into account what Don brought up at the beginning, is that, we need to be thinking about like overall tax impact and the impact on the levy. So, so scenario 3 tries to do that. So in scenario 3, I use the same methodology in terms of treating those things, the middle school out-of-district tuition and schools tier 1, treating those separately. But instead of using the 3.4% that we used in 2A and 2B, I try to find a number that gets us to, and these things end up being very close, but gets us to, I try to find an increase for underlying operating costs that gets us to a 2.44% increase in spending subject to guidelines, because that is the number that we're allowed in this tax impact table to increase guidelines without consuming any of the levy capacity. So if we want to
Yeah.
keep the levy capacity steady, and all of this, there are projections in here, so none of this is perfect. It's a 2.4% based on what we know, 2.44% is what we'd want to increase, set as our overall guideline. So when you back all that in, it results in CPS at 2.85% increase, not including the middle school savings, at 1.78% when you include the, net of the middle school savings. The CCRSD, their increase is 3.8%, and the town 2.43%. And then you can see in row 19, that would require all of the operating units going back to the drawing board and finding significantly more savings. So CPS would have to find over 500,000 more in savings. CCRSD would be the lowest at 143,000, and the town 480,000.
So what's the tax impact? What's the final
So that
percent,
would be,
a tax increase?
according to our table,
Yeah,
what would the tax impact be?
Yeah.
So that's also something Anthony and I are going to be working on, because there's more than just guideline spending that goes into the tax impact. But
Lindsay, a question on what you just presented. Since you created the number to keep the headroom current in the levy, against the levy limit, but then the 500,000 of savings would be in addition to that, right?
Well, no, you know what? So this is a good question, because I treated middle school kind of separately in here, but it's in the total guidelines number
budget.
here. So that 500,000 is in here in that 2.44%. It's already
Oh, it
factored
is.
in.
It's already factored in.
Yeah, so it's not, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So it's a separate column, but it's in the guideline,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
So if I'm reading this right, if we wanted to leave the levy capacity where it is, we'd have to ask the town and the schools collectively to cut from their budgets about $1 million.
A little more over $1 million.
A little over $1 million.
1.2 million.
1.2.
And if we have any guideline that's more than 2.44%, we're eating into the levy capacity.
That's accurate.
Thank you.
And so maybe this is a good time for Carlin's scenario.
But let me just clarify that, that's only, there's other
Yes.
ways that we can not eat into the
Yeah.
levy capacity.
So
Like,
we
just saying 2.44 is like, then we start eating to it, that's
Yeah.
not true, right? We can take that 500, for example, you know how we've used $1 million in free cash to offset the
Yeah.
tax action? I don't think we have that in this year, but like, if we did that,
Yeah,
right,
that-
then we wouldn't have to dig into levy capacity. So just so it's clear, it's like, it's not, we have to be at that
Yeah.
number, and then that's the only way we can stay at levy capacity.
Totally
Well,
true. And there's some assumptions built in to all of those
New
things.
growth.
Yeah.
I think you have the new growth in your graph,
Yeah, in
right?
assuming in coming up with the levy capacity, you do assume new growth.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the forecast.
So the new
This is
growth's a couple
forecasted
percent.
levy capacity. But
And that-
forecast is a forecast, like, so
Right.
there are, yeah.
So you don't, but you, at this time, you don't have the tax rate or the tax impacts for any of these scenarios?
No. But we're gonna work on that next. But so, yeah, because you'll remember that with the table we were talking about, which starts with like the levy, but then it adds on all the debt and all those other things.
Yeah.
We haven't done that yet, but we're gonna put our heads together and try to do that.
And Lindsay, the holding the levy capacity constant is in terms of the percentage of the number that we're holding constant is the unused levy capacity as a percentage of the total levy limit.
Yes, so it would be holding the excess levy capacity at 3.3%, which is the balance of the unused levy capacity as a percent of max base levy capacity.
Okay.
But it
Do you want to
holds it
repeat that
constant at, 3.8 million.
Okay. So it's the
Anthony's forecast, for what it's worth, and it's a
Yeah.
forecast, and he recognizes that it's not perfect at this time, we all do, but the levy capacity, you know, based on what we have in here now, the unused levy capacity goes, the projected unused levy capacity, hold on. Actually, hold on, sorry.
2.7 million in FY '25. It's that 5-year budget forecast from the other night.
Yeah. I feel like I was looking at something different here.
So we're eating up.
Oh, yeah.
1.8 million of it
Yeah,
with the requested and the budget forecast.
Wow.
but like Greg said, that's not like set in stone. There's other things that,
No.
levers to pull.
I mean, that's like, here's our request. You can have it all. Which,
Well,
correct me
Greg,
if I'm wrong, we've never done that.
Greg, if I understand you correctly, you're saying we can take money from our reserves.
So in the past, right, there's always been a warrant article, $1 million of free cash go into the taxes to offset taxes for the town,
And where does that come from?
Free cash.
But where does that get replenished from?
Oh, from the next year.
I mean, my point is,
I'm only
that's not a sustainable
I'm-
model.
Well, it was done for
It-
8 years. Peggy,
Forever.
you may know.
Forever.
Yeah, it was done for,
Is that right?
Is that
yes.
because
It was-
Rotor came in
we
higher
actually
than we
stopped it.
projected?
We actually
We go in the
No,
red
no,
then.
it's, the free cash, I mean, you have to forecast and budget higher, I mean, there has to be some,
Underspending.
a little bit of wiggle room in there, or you're gonna run out of money
Yeah.
before the year ends. So there's always some, what it is there's always some line items that don't spend all that money.
Yeah.
I mean, we've
And
come
that
from the
goes
5 back
back
up
to-
to 7 or 8.
Yeah,
right?
but,
Yeah,
but,
but-
Badly named category of free cash,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
unspent.
Anthony and then Lois.
yeah, Greg, yes, but, you know, by doing that, is it really a sustainable model? We're not planning for the future. You know what I forecasted in capital. So, to me, that's a Band-Aid where the approach of creating some stabilization is making us be able to deal with those capital requests, and/or if the economy ever was in a bad situation, that Concord can withstand that. So doing what you've been doing hasn't set yourself up to be able to deal
Totally.
with these capital
Yeah.
buildings.
100% agree. It was just making the comment
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it can
no,
be offset.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And just, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't do it last year.
We did not do
No,
it
that was
last
the-
year.
And that was when we consciously made the decision not to go into free cash to lower the tax. We also looked, we've been going into free cash to fund the stabilization fund we set up to smooth the
Right.
payment curve on the middle school
And we were
debt.
way down in free
Right.
cash.
And
Right.
what we did last year was we looked at the balance in the account and where interest, and the interest that was being collected in the account, and we said, no contribution, don't need it. So we put ourselves on a path to begin to manage free cash a little differently. And I'd also remind everybody that there's a lot of hands reaching out for free cash. There are a lot of worthy causes and different constituencies in town that would like help, and free cash is a sort of an obvious thing to ask for. I recall last year sort of beating back, I could say that more gently, a request from the 250th Commission for money from free cash. I mean,
Can we
so-
just bounce out of the free cash? Because I was not advocating we use it. I was just giving you, like, we don't, let's stop with, let's
Then
go
let's
back to
move on.
guidelines. Let's
Then
go
let's
back to
move on.
guidelines. I didn't
That's
want
fine, let's
to,
move
sorry to derail.
Quicksand.
It's a good point that all this is kind of a forecast. These are all direct, the best we can do. Yeah.
So can you just review the 4 options you have here and what % increases that would be seen?
Yeah, and let me just do Carlin's scenario
Oh,
really quick,
okay.
and then we'll go back to that. So Carlin dug into this and said, well, could we do something that's a little bit in between scenario 2 and 3, or 2B and 3? In other words, instead of, so if you remember 2B, we have this 3.4% increase for the underlying costs. In scenario 3, it's 2.4%. Well, what about something kind of a little bit in between? And she said maybe 3.2%. And so we put that in here, and so that does, so what it ends up doing, so this is just another scenario to consider, it ends up increasing total spending subject to guidelines by 3.22% overall. It ends up being, with including the middle school savings, it's 2.55% for CPS, 4.57% for CCRSD, and 3.21% for the town.
Looks like CCRDs, there's a positive.
Oh, yeah, so actually, you're right, so take that out, because we probably wouldn't give them more, so it would be a little lower than this.
Yeah.
So we need
Yeah,
Carlin
sorry about
B, Carlin's B scenario now to take that out?
Okay,
Yeah, we
now,
need-
let the record reflect that I did not ask this to be named after me.
Oh, sorry. Well,
It could have been an anonymous scenario 4, but I appreciate the attention.
idea.
Well, I
Call it
thank you very much.
Carlin, so we're going to call it the Reed scenario.
Oh,
I think that's
geez,
cute.
okay, fine. Well,
yeah, the Reed
for the Reed scenario, that was exactly my purpose, is trying to find a middle ground, because I'm remembering last year what it was like to try and see if the schools could cut out $175,000 from their budget, and what was going on in that. And I thought, well, maybe this is somewhere in between, so we have options, and that's what I wanted to
Yep,
make sure we had,
I
was
agree.
options. That's
One point on that, Colin, that there's a big difference this year in that last year we skipped the preliminary guideline. We went straight to final. So I think it's important to bear in mind, this is our initial stake in the ground. This isn't our final answer or final offer. What we expect to do is set a preliminary guideline tonight and then give it a month to collect feedback and input from the budget units, from the taxpayers, from Carlisle. They're now in the mix. And then sit down and set a final guide, apply revisions as needed, and then set a final guideline in December.
And a
Tree.
question for Liz. On this scenario, the last one you just, how does it affect the levy?
Yeah, oh, yeah, because I don't have that in the table.
It is some of the,
It's on your table, it's just not highlighted.
Oh, okay,
About
yeah,
100,000
so
less.
3.22.
Yeah,
and then-
2.6, it goes down to 2.6%.
Oh, yeah, oh, it's in my summary.
It's in your summary, it's just not highlighted, but it's down there. Yeah, it reduces about 805,112.
All right, so yeah, this is the summary sheet. So if we go back and now these are ordered in, except for the one we just reviewed, the Reed scenario. These are ordered in order from largest tax impact and levy capacity consumed impact down to the smallest.
Okay.
And so scenario 1 is just giving the operating units the amount they forecasted in October. So that is the biggest, the amount of unused levy capacity consumed is 1.16 million. It allows total spending to go up 3.66 million, and the total spending subject to guidelines goes up, it is 3.57%, and it's a little bit different by unit. 2A, so you can kind of follow it down the line. So the unused levy capacity consumed, ranges from 0 in scenario 3 up to 1.16 million in scenario 1, based on all these are all forecasts, but so it'll be somewhere in that ballpark. And then these are the total percentage increases in the guideline, spending subject to guidelines.
So I guess I want to throw something out, which is, in a couple of years, we're going to have tremendous expenditures projected. And I'm just wondering, I'm an advocate for number 3, only because I think we really have to be looking at more than just what we're doing this year. I think we have to also look a little bit and examine further out. And also the taxpayers, I don't know what the impact is going to be to taxpayers, but I think if it's a 2.44 increase, that's going to be less of an impact to taxpayers than if it's a 3.57% increase. So I'm just looking at, yes, we can think of it as just this year, but I think we have to keep in mind that in FY '28, we're going to be looking at a lot of money that's going to be spent on buildings, et cetera. And I just wonder, how can we accommodate the present, but also be mindful of what's coming up in the future that we have to plan for and find money for?
Colin.
I think Dee makes some very good points. I'm going to advocate for, of course, number 4, the REIT scenario, because I think a $500,000 cut to the CPS budget would be too much sticker shock. However, I do think it sends a message, at least at this preliminary guideline, which we can change later on, that we're heading down a pathway that is not sustainable. We've seen from the prior budget guidelines that fiscal year '28, we may be heading for an override, and the need to change how we do our budgeting. So I would go with something that is a little bit not what the schools asked for at this early time, but about halfway, which is the option 4.
Peggy, we'll go around the room.
Can we just take a look at the backup, because I think this doesn't add up to me. Scenario 3, we're going to try to find 1.3 million in the 3 budgeting entities.
Oh,
Is that
so, yeah, I
correct?
don't have that on this sheet, so let's go to scenario 3.
1.1.2,
Yeah, 1.15.
1.2, okay.
1.2, yeah. So
and then in
yeah.
Carlin's scenario, it was 300,000, you said? And that doesn't
Yeah,
make
because what I didn't do, it's not halfway, is what you're saying,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, it's
not halfway.
It should
So
be.
it's 3.2.
That should be a lot closer to
So halfway would
2B.
be,
Yeah.
so, because you can see how 2B is 3.4% on the underlying, and 3 is 2.4, so somewhere halfway in between would
Should
be,
be more like 700.
yeah, it would be. So this is a little bit more, a little closer to scenario 2B than it is to scenario 3. That's right.
And which would also change the,
Yeah.
the Reed example. I mean, those numbers would go up. See, that says 360.
Oh, yeah, so
I
if
don't
we,
understand how that can be 360 at 3.22 and 1.2 million at,
well, if the,
or
so look at 2B.
3.31.
2B,
Yeah,
they've got to reduce by 246.
yep,
And Carlin's, they have to reduce by 361 total.
okay.
So, yeah, not that far off.
Right, it's not halfway.
And to Sri's comment, like,
You add
we
up-
would
you add
give
that-
back that 30,000, that 35,000, we wouldn't probably give CCRSD more than
I think you add that to the 360, it's almost 400,000, right? If you remove the 34,000.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more like 400,000. Because this 34, we wouldn't really, yeah.
Okay. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I really liked your scenario 2B or 2A, 2B, which I can't recall which one I really liked, but that I think the path, like one of the paths forward for long-term fiscal management is aligning the ability to control a budget at that budget level, so that as we tighten the belt, they have the levers to do so, as opposed to having these huge fluctuations that they can't control, that really make it harder to foresee what their needs are going to be as they move forward. And I mean, if you look at that, like a 10% swing is a huge amount that, like, it makes looking forward on any kind of forecast for some of those units impossible to, like, trust. So the more that we can do to kind of treat the town and the schools the same, I think the better it'll be. So that's my 2 cents.
John?
Awesome analysis, by the way. I think more detail is better, and this is pretty great to help us. I think we are all talking about the future, and we're all concerned about what's coming down the pike. And I don't think we are putting a stake in the ground and rattling sabers like we should be doing. The town has no revenue plan coming. 229 is years and years away. MCI is years and years away. Select Board's not focused on revenue. Select Board did, I think, accurately say on Monday, it's town spending, which happens at the town meeting. And I think we have an opportunity to actually really put a stake in the ground and say, this is not sustainable. And since we don't have revenue growth on the horizon, the only way to do that is to manage our budgets. And I think all these scenarios are well and good. I'm not sure any of them really do have a shot over the bow. One of the things I was wondering is just, is the basis the right basis? So I went back to 2011 using the budget book, so if numbers are slightly off, bear with me, I just pulled it from there. And just looking at the town, in 2011, the town budget was around 17 million. So now we're about 34 million. So town's been growing at roughly 5.3% annual growth rate. CPI has been growing at about 2.6% growth rate over that time period. Now, it's obviously fluctuated with some more than others, but adding another 2 or 3% on this basis, is that the right basis we should be adding on to? How do we know that this is the most efficient use, or the money in the pot now is the most efficient money in the pot? If you just grew the town budget at CPI, again, all these, CPI is not the perfect number, the budget would be about $9 million left.
Can I just ask, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want a point of clarification. When you say the town, are you talking specifically with the town piece of it, or are you talking about the overall?
Just town, not school, just town. I'm looking at town and school differently. I know we're trying to focus on one number, but I'm looking at it differently. And so there's my question, is this the right basis to be growing off of? And if we are, last year we talked about 7.8%, which started people thinking, are we really doing enough to advise the town about what's coming? I would advocate scenario 5, which would be to the town, not the schools, the town, something along the line of 1%, and say, get your house in order and figure this out. And if you need more money, then the town employees and the select board should get together and figure out, because we are going down an unsustainable path. Taxes are going way up. It's really becoming a problem in this town, and we have an opportunity to do something about it. The town can disagree with us, obviously, like they do in the past, but why not plant a flag and say this is unsustainable? Let's start getting a handle on it right now.
Just one observation, without disagreeing specifically, but 70%, 70% of the money goes to the schools. So you can't, I totally agree that we need to be looking at cost management, we need to be looking at more efficiencies, but we need, and the figures that you just gave about the town piece of it are very interesting, but I don't think you can look at them in isolation. It's just not enough bang for the buck. Anyway, so much of a percentage of the town's overall revenues are spent on the schools that you have to look at all the pieces of it.
I'm not saying we're not looking at all the pieces of it, but to disregard one 30% piece because it's not bang for the buck is I think shirking our duty. And then we can look at the schools itself and say, how do we want to address the schools, because they are the driving force here. And in addition to all the warrant articles that are piled on top of it.
I understand. I'm just saying that that's what we need to be doing now, is looking at the whole, the town, looking at the town is an interesting example, and it's very relevant. And 30% is far from nothing. But we can't just look at that, because it just isn't going to address the...
So I don't think I'm advocating for that. I think
Okay.
what I'm doing
No, I
is
just-
mentioning,
that's
what
what
I'm doing is mentioning one item
Okay, I just want to be
that
clear.
stands out to me and says, instead of having a uniform guideline across them all, maybe we should address them differently and then we can address the schools. So the town, to me, stands out the most because of the growth, and I just wanted to bring that one point up and not monopolize it, the whole thing, but say, here's something that's standing out to me, and instead of saying I want one of these 4 scenarios writ large, in my head, I'm saying I want to put a stake in the ground and say the town gets something like a nominal 1%, and then I need to myself think how I would address the schools.
Okay, as long as the schools are part of the thinking.
Oh, 100%. You know,
Okay.
schools
All
get
right.
tricky because I think the out-of-district, my 2 minutes are up.
Well, do you, John, thank you for the
Thank you.
offering another option. Do you have just to, because the goal is to vote tonight. So ideally, we'd have a few discrete scenarios, but at the end of this discussion to consider. Do you have a thought on what the school portion would be? So you've said 1% for the
We
town.
can do that if we want to. Let me just do that. Well, let me just take it off and do that.
Can you
I
run a false scenario?
also think that the voting public will be more sympathetic to making changes to the town than the schools. So
I agree.
we can,
I
we
agree
can
with
do things at the margin. I understand we're not solving for Concord on one night, but we can start on the margin while educating and working with the town and the schools to say, how do we control expenditures and grow revenue? But there is no revenue growth in the next 5 to 10 years. It's just not happening.
I would be interested in, on the town side, building a metric of full-time equivalent compared to per capita, town population, and the same metric for the schools, total school payroll in each unit compared to student population. And just the full-time equivalent, full-time equivalent, because, you know, personnel drives it, and I think that is growing. But the population has grown. Second point, we've seen the movie before, John, and I think that's why you didn't put the schools in here. We have put a stake in the ground. We did it 2 years in a row, and we're accused of being anti-school and voted down at town meeting. We've all seen that movie, and I think we should keep on trying, but we've seen that movie.
Okay. Thank you, Peggy. Dawn.
John, I want to address some of what you've said. First off, I want to echo, this is a phenomenal analysis. Thank you, Lindsay. I think that I went down this same path last year and looked at the growth in the town spending and found that it was predominantly for debt service, because all of the school building debt is showing up in the town's budget. And one of my asks for Anthony after this is to break apart that piece, the debt, what is it for, and what is the debt service cost, so we can properly think of where it belongs, and then also look at the shared costs, because the town's budget also includes all of the health insurance and retirement benefits for the school's employees.
Yep.
So there is a scenario, if we followed your path, where we would have no town government left. And I think we just want to have our eyes wide open. I totally agree with the sentiment here. I just think we need to go a little bit deeper into the town's budget, that aspect of the shared spending.
The debt, though, isn't in the spending subject to guidelines.
It isn't subject to guidelines, but it is in the total percentage of the total spend. So when we look at the total growth of the total budget,
Yes.
it's been driven by the debt.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think, 'cause when I tried my own, going through the budget books, to peel that back, the town's budget's been growing at like less than 2%, the actual expenditures. So your sentiment right on. In fact, I was going to say, we started last year to alert people to where the taxes are going. And I plan, when we talk a little bit later on the FinCom report, on how I want to try to drive that message home through the report. But that said, I think our mission here is the guideline, but the bigger picture is we own the role of advising the town on the total spend. And there is an awful lot coming down the pike. So I was going to suggest earlier when we were saying, whenever, as we get back to the budgeting entities with our guideline, we alert them to where we are relative to the levy limit, and we ask for their suggestions for how we can remain, because to say that this has been, we've been approaching the zero bound for years. And so there has to be a solution going forward. Would it be better to start that solution now or not? When I look at where we are, I think we're dangerously close already. I think if we'd had these conversations a couple of years ago, we might have taken a little bit tougher stance. Okay.
Can I, a clarifying question to your analysis, were you looking at spending subject to guidelines or total town spending?
Total town
That
spending.
was total town, okay.
And I think, John, you were looking at the total town budget.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay,
So that was in there.
okay, got it. That's separate from the schools.
Greg?
What would be, John, I don't know if you started it on your computer there, what would be if
Oh,
we
I
did?
did the 1% for the
No,
town.
of Paul's
Okay.
request to take out,
Oh, take out the total, okay, oh,
take out the
All right.
full amount,
let me do that.
rather than just the increase.
Okay.
And while Lindsay's doing that, I'm just going by memory, but I think that our spending on debt went from 3% of the budget to over 12% of the budget. And not just the town's budget, the total budget.
Was that just with the middle school, or?
No, it was all the schools.
No, I mean, because of the middle school, or, no? just
No,
various other things?
I probably looked back 10 years, something like that.
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
Before the high school.
Yeah.
So at that point, we had the Alcott and Thoreau. 4 or 5 years later, we had Willard, so that, plus some other stuff. Madison Fields, others, more short-term stuff.
Yeah, I
But-
guess
but
my
when you
point,
go
Peggy,
back
is that it
that far,
should,
If you go to 10 years, then you don't have, you're not including the high school.
is that my only point really is that that was the driver of the increase in the town's budget.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, Lindsay's whipping
Yeah,
that
that
up.
must be a-
Other points or other questions? Colin?
We're supposed to be doing a final guideline December 19th?
Yep.
Is it possible to extend that date after December 19th? Because we don't have to have it actually done until 5 weeks before the town meeting starts, right?
Actual deadline.
It's related to the warrant.
The actual deadline is, I think, January 15th, and we do have one meeting in January, just before that, and there have been some conversations about this. I think there's two things to keep in mind. That's a hard deadline, the January 15th deadline, and we're up against it if for any reason we miss it, and it is still New England in January. We may not get a quorum. There could be things that happen that put off our January 9th meeting. So I think it's dangerous potentially to put it off. More importantly, the concept of guidelines, and Eric can speak to this more eloquently than I can, is to give guidance to the budgeting entities as they are developing their budgets. So there's no, giving them guidance in January when they've got to get their budgets done immediately is not as useful as giving them guidance in time for them to take the feedback, things like, what John was saying about putting the stake in the ground and making it clear what goals we're setting. Setting the guideline in mid-January means we've given them that guidance. They have a chance to respond. We do have time to do some revisions if there's something compelling that comes out, rather than waiting until the warrant articles are published and we have to process it through the hearing process. So I think it's a very good idea for us to get the final guideline done in December. And I think it will enhance the likelihood that we will come to a real consensus with the budgeting entities and be able to have a much smoother town meeting process. So that's my view.
Yeah, and this came up, as Lois said, this came up, some of the school leadership raised this question. So I want to acknowledge that, and we talked about it, and I welcome other members' thoughts. This possibility of pushing out the date by which we set the final guideline so that it's closer to, as I understand it, it's closer to the day they expect to have their budget.
What's the day that they expect to have their budget?
I don't want to misstate. Carrie, do you want to? This came up in a conversation that I had with Carrie and Julia. And I don't want to miss it. It was mid-January.
I'm just pulling up the calendar. I think it's January 9th, whatever that Tuesday is.
That's for your,
So January 7th is when we will have our first, the administration will present the budget to the school
the first time,
for
the first time. And
Typically, it's in early to mid-December. This year, it's being pushed back because of town meeting. Or
Right.
The fall is the hardest time.
Right.
So yeah, so the administration will push it back to January.
January, and then what is your absolute deadline?
Town meeting.
Town meeting,
Yeah. So,
right?
So and we thought about this. I did, I respect the fact that the school leadership asked this question. Lois articulated the two thoughts we went over. One is this mechanical issue that we have to have this finalized by January 15th, and that doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room. There could be a blizzard, that we might not get a quorum.
You could
Who
have a
knows?
Zoom meeting.
That's true. That's true. But it is.
It's
To me, it's an unnecessary risk and source of uncertainty. The other issue, though, the bigger issue, in my opinion, is this. And there's a philosophical discussion to be had here, but it's my position, Lois. It sounds like you agree with me that the guideline is meant to come first. The guideline informs the budget, not the other way around. We call it a guideline because it guides the development of the budget. So we want the guideline to be first. In fact, that's why we structured the schedule for this year the way we did, is to get the guideline to you, the budget units, as early as possible, given that town meeting's not happening till June. Gary.
Yeah, just one note on that.
Yeah, you should come to a mic.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. No, just one note on that. And I actually think this conversation, first of all, has been incredibly thoughtful and detailed. And Lindsay, this is an amazing analysis. So I've learned a lot as well. So thank you for all the time that went into this. I think that it is helpful to hear all of this conversation in advance of our budget, but it would be really great if before the final is presented, we have an opportunity to take all of this and apply it to the budget as Bob and Lawyer are piecing it together, and then have the final guideline set, so that there is just a minute even between the two, so that we have a chance to say what our reaction is and how we would go about meeting it or coming close or whatever it would be.
I know that it's a tough time of year for everybody, but maybe the compromise is that we allocate some time on our December agenda. Lori was listening, you're listening. Before we have the vote, for you to present additional information to us, and if you don't want to do it in person, you could do it in writing. We want you to be part of the process, and we want this process to be informed. But we also want to inform you. So if there's information, even if it isn't, and I understand it won't be the full budget because of your own scheduling, if there's information you can provide to us that will help us before we have that vote, we would be pleased to have it presented to us in whatever form is most convenient to you, in person, writing, whatever works. And then you would have the guideline in December to inform what you come out with. It's a living process. But I think what the whole idea of it is, you have information in front of you, you have the underlying analysis and the number that we are saying we would like you to come in at when you are finalizing the budget. I actually think it works better.
Okay, let's get back to the scenarios. We are going to talk about the schedule before we adjourn, and I did have a proposal that I think speaks to what you're suggesting, Lois. But let's get back to the scenarios.
Okay. All right, I think we put into place, so this scenario that I'm showing you now, let's call it 2C, is treats the out-of-district completely separate. So instead of adding back the incremental out-of-district tuition that they're expecting between 2025 and 26, the increase that they're expecting, I take it out completely, like the way I did with capital, and add it back completely. So it's not that different, but it is different. So scenario 2B has a total increase of 3.33%, and scenario 2C, where I treat out-of-district completely separately, it's 3.27%. So it's not, and I don't have an extra column here to show anything, but all the calculations are below here. So in other words, here, let me just show you it. Let's go down to CCRSD again. I'll stop scrolling in a second. So in scenario 2B, for CCRSD, when I go and look at the underlying costs, I add back the forecasted increase in out-of-district tuitions because I just assume they remain flat. I didn't remove them completely, so I'm adding back the forecasted increase. Whereas in scenario 2C, I remove them completely, and then I add them completely back. So I think it's the better way to do it, and it was Paul's suggestion. It doesn't change the total that much, but I think it's more accurate. So in other words, we end up, scenario 2C is I think a more accurate way of doing it. It's just slightly lower than 2B. But this scenario now also allows us to do what John wanted to do, which is look at a different target for town versus school. So if we do town at 1% and keep the schools at that 3.4 and do town at 1%, it now takes us to a total increase of 2.51%, and the town would have to reduce their forecast down by almost $1 million.
Should there be a pink square under the high school?
So the high school, no, I didn't change anything with the schools, but what happened if in scenario 2A that we corrected in 2B and 2C is that we end up giving CCRSD more than they requested using this methodology.
But should we plug a number in there?
So which we take that back. So I kind of take that back in scenarios 2B and 2C, and instead just give them exactly what they forecasted.
Lindsay, so it looked like you had 1-point-something million for the out-of-district, is that what I saw?
For CPS, the out-of-district tuition forecast is 1.8 million. For CCRSD, the out-of-district is 3.9 million.
Okay, that's where I see the difference.
Okay, so they're
two different ones, thank you.
And yeah, obviously CCRSD has a much lower budget for Concord's portion, and it's a much bigger percentage of their overall budget.
No, you go ahead. The 1% increase for the town.
And that's just the scenario that John wanted to run.
Yeah, it has an arbitrary quality to me. And it's $1 million out of the town's budget. The town has, I am not defending a decade of town spending or 2 decades of town spending, but I'm thinking about the services that need to be provided, and one of our mandates has always been to do the guidelines based on the expectation of level service. It's hard for me to imagine that the town is going to be able to provide anything close to level service with that substantial a reduction. So, I mean, I'd just like to start a conversation about this. The 1% feels very arbitrary to me.
I didn't see level service in our mandate.
And I don't think we can expect level service going forward from the town.
It's a drastic reduction of services, $1 million.
Okay. Paul?
My comment would be that I do like the fact that you're not, for CCRSD, that you're not giving them extra money. But I think that's a function of how all calculations work. Now, it would be a way to offset some of the other issues with other budget entities that we could decrease theirs as well
Yeah.
by putting in something in the calculus that would allow us to kind of share the pain.
Share that with
Yeah.
the other entities.
I mean, so like, for example, if they weren't level, and we arbitrarily decrease them, and not arbitrary is the wrong word, but, allowed a more focused, percentage increase, that would offset some of the needs elsewhere and not necessarily have such a drastic increment in other places. So does that make sense? And I did say before, great, this is really cool, I like it.
Greg?
I don't know the town's budget, Don, you may know how to answer this one. Does the town have any similar things like the school that can be excluded? Because we obviously want to try and apply the same principle to all of the entities, right? Does the...
Yeah, John and I were just looking at this, the just sort of the subject to guideline spend from the town is like 32 million. The total is 55.
Yeah.
The rest is debt service
Right, so
and.
most of it's already out there, right?
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Okay.
And we do specifically ask when we put out that request in August, tell us about things that are unpredictable or that are concerning you, tell us these things so we can, and that's why we've been excluding them.
So if you don't mind me speaking a little bit more, I think another way to look at then the out-of-district tuition would be looking at that as not subject to guideline. In a similar way as debt service and other items that are within the budget, then and then decrease that percentage that is probably some of that flexibility is baked into other places, and force kind of fiscal responsibility on the overall budgets. And
Out of guidelines altogether.
I mean,
You're applying the percentage to the
Or put
other
it in a
stuff,
different
the
bucket.
not out of district.
Yes.
Not tier one, you're just applying it to the other,
But
which I
I
think
am,
is what she
but I'm
did.
still including in the overall, this 2.51% still includes those increases. And you're-
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're saying, what would that look like if we didn't include them at all?
I mean, I'm not trying to make you make a million scenarios.
No, but-
But I'm just trying to think of, trying to align the guidance with what can be controlled and get to the ultimate goal of being able to provide a true picture of long-term, health of the town and the schools in a way that, the budget units can control.
Peggy?
Yeah, taking things in and out of guidelines is one thing, but I'm looking at the 5-year budget forecast that
Yeah.
goes into red numbers. This is the one from the other night, starting in fiscal
Yeah, of
'28,
course.
and that was at the 4%. So obviously, if we're getting down to 2.5 or 2.6, my question is when does it turn red in that scenario? Because
Yeah.
everyone, the schools need to be educated as well. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the town is aware, but if they don't start cutting now, we're gonna have to go for an override just to do the budget in a mere 5 years. None of us will be on the committee then,
Right.
but, if they haven't been through that fun process, it's not quite the same as going to town meeting and pushing through the budget. It's very intense.
And the
And that's where we're headed.
consequences of the override not passing are pretty extreme.
It's much higher. It has to go to the vote, and it needs 2/3.
Right, and if it doesn't pass, then you're in a really difficult situation.
That's right.
So,
So I think, I'm sure the administration at the school But it's time to start educating the general public that,
We've been trying the last
I know, I know.
Okay, so we've got a few scenarios out there. I am mindful of time. I don't want to cut this short. This has been a great discussion.
I don't know if we're nailed down all the scenarios though, because there's the treating out of district completely separate, and I should make this one, and I don't know if we aligned on doing something different for the schools versus the town. That one, I think I don't know if we have a complete alignment yet.
Right. That came up at town meeting last year as well, and people didn't understand that the town actually covers some of the costs of the schools. And that was, and I think that was an impact, and that was part of the
Their
reasoning.
overall budget.
Yeah, and part of the reasoning that the school got the budget that they wanted, because people really didn't understand that all the costs associated with the schools are not necessarily in the school budget.
Didn't we, it was the CCRSD budget that we,
That didn't align with the
that didn't
guideline.
align, and CCRSD budget is different. The costs that are carried in the town budget are related to CPS.
I understand
CCRSD, so that's,
But people don't understand that either.
I get that, but I don't know that was a driving force in that vote. The year before, when we were arguing about CPS.
Maybe I'm
that
off
might
a
have been
year.
problem, maybe, but in that year, I think we were able to work out a compromise at the last.
Well,
minute.
it doesn't matter now, but going forward, I think we have to really look at and examine where are the costs for the schools and where are the costs for the town.
Paul.
So I think, which provides a good opportunity like today, because we could signal this conversation with a preliminary guidance of saying, here's what here's for your budget formulation, here's the guidance that we have because of what our reasons are. And allow to come back and have that discussion of like, we can't meet it. Or, okay, that's great. They're not gonna do that. But like, we can't meet it because of a variety of reasons. So preliminary guidance should be, more aggressive to set like expectations. And then, which allows us to listen to feedback and create a finalized guideline, which then can work towards it. I think it would be really great, and maybe I'm just optimistic because I'm new, that, and I did go to town meeting.
Yeah.
No, that's not that's a question of like, that I haven't seen it before. I haven't seen the pain before. I went to a couple meetings, I went to town meeting, I saw some of the reaction, but the goal would really be of communicating, not necessarily with all the members of the town, but communicating with the budget units, of saying like, pains now or pains later. Let's work together to like figure out how we can make it more palatable, because it's gonna have to happen.
I'm right there with you. I think it needs to be a joint process, and it's gotta be, all right, here it is. We have 3 years to get from A to Z.
Right.
And how are we gonna do it? And it's a collective decision-making like that.
Right,
And that's between the town and the schools.
100%.
And then that is jointly taken to any annual town meeting that people have to vote on. But the people also have to be informed. So there has to be communication to our citizenry on what's happening and what the projections are.
And I think scenario 3, given the input I'm hearing and just the sense of the room, scenario 3 to me makes some sense here.
Let me make it 3 new that has,
No!
it takes that out of district,
Give it a better name. Want that name after you, Greg?
Well, scenario 3 as it stands, we'll see what.
Free
Hold on,
cash.
one
No,
second, because it'll be very similar.
Okay, but just philosophically, it's it it gets to, I think it gets to the point that John is raising.
Yes.
Not as far as John is necessarily wanting to go, but it gets there. It's a more aggressive preliminary guideline.
Conversation.
Exactly. It forces the conversation. All the budget units have said their forecasts are rough estimates. I don't think it makes sense to align the preliminary guideline with their forecasts because they've all said they're rough. They need to be refined. So that's much too high for a preliminary guideline. So to me, scenario 3 represents a viable option as a preliminary guideline.
With the town at 1%?
No.
No.
No. It would be scenario 3. The only way I'm making it different is by treating that as out of districts, completely separate.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's consensus on that idea. Like-
Which I think it's the more accurate way to do it.
On the out of district?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not,
Yeah,
I'm
let's-
sorry, when I say completely separate, I mean before I was just
Right.
adding back the increment, and this way I'm just taking
Okay.
But it's
yeah, and
not,
then putting them completely
but
back
Liz,
in.
it's
Yeah,
not
it's
much
back
of a
in there.
difference.
Okay.
It's not much of a difference.
Okay, I
It's-
understand.
It's
I understand.
more like yeah, it's just more of an accurate way to do it.
And,
Yeah.
so there's two pieces of this. One is we end up with a preliminary guideline around 2.44,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is right in the middle of our metrics.
Yes, that's true.
And secondly, we've got some allocations, but one place we can play is with the allocations. We've done that before, given a little more to one unit,
Oh, yes, we can do that.
right. So these
So
are,
if we wanted to, we could, yeah.
and I'm not suggesting we start doing that now. I'm just saying that in terms, this is preliminary. So if we're setting 2.4% as the goal, then what's underneath it is also preliminary and is something that we can think about again in a month after we've gotten some more feedback, for example, from Anthony, who's probably got a lot to think about based on this
Blowing
conversation.
his hair out.
So you don't
Full head of hair when I came in.
You've never heard that joke.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily saying change anything yet in the scenario 3. It's just that, here it is, folks, this is what we're thinking about. We want your feedback.
Well-
For both the school and the town, right? And that but to say we can, I'm just
Should
saying.
illustrate to us what it would take.
Right, yeah.
I think we should take some money back from the high school. We can't just give them.
Hold on, I've got to fix one thing. Sorry, doing all this stuff on the fly, I think I messed
Yeah,
up.
and Eric, can
Just
you
one
just
thing.
clarify, because a number of people have said it now, we're just doing on the 2.44 across the board for everybody tonight,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I messed up.
Yeah.
What?
right?
yeah.
Because the sheet shows different we're just going with 2.44 for
Yeah.
across.
Yeah,
I didn't do this.
No, but like, and we'll give that to the town, we'll give that to the.
right.
Or do you want to go one deeper?
No, it's
That's what I want you to clarify.
2.44. 2.44 is I call it the aggregate guideline. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
Oh, but
It's different. It's
It's
not the
parceled
same by
down
budget
So
to-
that's
unit.
why, that's what I was gonna ask, like,
Okay.
let's discuss then the allocation, because you just brought it up,
Well, we can
right?
either
Well-
discuss that
Hold
now.
on.
there is an
Just
allocation
give me 1
already in
minute
it.
to correct
No,
something.
but I wanted to clarify what we're
Yeah,
we're going on, right? And if we just say 2.44,
right.
right, then it gives us a chance to hear what they have, come back, then do the allocation.
Yep.
So I don't know if we even have to go to that level tonight.
Yeah,
That-
I think
I
I
agree.
like this.
That's where I'm going to.
And does that doesn't necessarily say that the school can offset their budget with the 500K, does it?
And that's already in there.
Yeah.
So
So,
I would, there was
but
something
if we're
else.
saying that they're
They don't
set
get to
at,
count that twice.
they don't,
Yeah, they
okay.
shouldn't be, yeah.
Yeah, that.
What's the 500K?
Savings on the
That's
school.
savings.
Oh, the six,
Operating in the middle school.
oh.
So the 2.4, I just accidentally closed my spreadsheet. The 2.44 is the top line guideline. If you look at the detail tab for scenario 3, it breaks out what the guideline would be for each budget unit.
Correct, got it.
Okay.
Under,
Yeah.
under
And
that,
I'm
yeah.
asking the question.
Let me undo
Are
this,
we
'cause
just
I-
gonna say 2.44 across the
I'll
board for
share.
everybody right now as a guideline? thus giving us the opportunity to what Lois said, when they come back to us, we can then do allocations a little bit higher or lower to each
If we
unit.
explain that to, in the way we communicate what the guideline is, we should explain it, because otherwise, you know, there'll be some heart attacks. Because in fact, there will be some differences in how it's allocated, but we can express it as our goal is that the total increase in guideline spending across all the budgeting units not exceed that number, and that might be sufficient as a preliminary guideline, triggering some thought and some more feedback for us. And then, you know, we should all plan on a long meeting in December.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wasn't doing the CCRSD, correct? They do have to give back money.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now they all do,
Okay.
yeah. It wasn't calculating correct for this new
Well, they
scenario.
all are getting less than they were requesting.
Yes, they're all getting less than they requested.
But, no, I can't really read it. Lindsay.
Okay,
It's
so
not your fault, it's me.
the,
You zoom in one, maybe
So,
that might help.
Oh,
want to
okay.
just, should I zoom in one by one here? Hold on.
Yeah. Oh, I need to get my glasses.
Okay, so if we just look at CPS, they requested this 48,373. Well, net of the middle school savings is 47,873, and we're saying give them 47,358, so it's 500,000 they would have to reduce.
And we are just, you know, to remind everybody, they gave us information, and it was, the schools have been very cooperative in trying to provide us with information this time, and it's really appreciated, but they haven't done their budget yet this year. So, we don't know how difficult this number will be for them until we hear back.
So this is, yeah, and then it would be 207,000 for CCRSD, and for the town, 437. So for all, and this treats everybody the same for the underlying increase, it applies 2.56%, and that gets you to an overall of this 2.44%. Because remember, the middle school savings helps us.
Okay.
So you could give them that sheet. You could forward that to the town, and you could forward that to the school, and they would have their marching orders. Is that correct?
If this is what, yeah,
If
whatever
that's
we
what
vote
we
on, I can
decide
give
that
them,
they-
whatever
So
we vote on.
If you give that to them, that's basically telling them to come back at what they forecast, correct?
No.
No, this is
No.
their
No, no,
forecast.
no.
This is
Their
saying
forecast
their
has to go down
forecast
by-
is
Or go down by
500
that much, all right.
Go
thank
down
you.
by 500,000,
Yeah.
200,000.
Yeah, that red line, that red line.
Lindsay, I have a
Lowering the
quick
forecast
question.
by that much.
Maybe I'm just a
Yeah.
little dense. I don't understand why this number's 3.53%
Okay.
and not 256.
Okay, so, the underlying increase for CCRSD is 2.56. When you add back out-of-district tuitions,
Okay.
and when you add back tier
Cool.
one
I got it.
capital,
I got it.
it takes it up to 3.53%.
Now, I answered, yeah, I was dense.
Yeah.
No worries.
No, and then CPS has another impact, which is, so there's not including middle school savings, theirs is higher too than the 2.56 and 2.89, then you factor in the middle school savings, it's 1.81.
Totally understand. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
And this is a
But-
scenario that doesn't touch the levy limit capacity.
This is the scenario, and again, that's
Right.
also a forecast,
Right.
but yes, in this, and to Greg's earlier point, there are other things that we could, the other tools you could use.
Don't go
there,
there.
but yeah.
Yep.
It's now again though, this is the preliminary guideline. This is not the marching orders. This is us, to John's point, putting a stake in the ground, saying we heard you, we heard your forecast. The forecast came in high. All the budget units acknowledged that when they presented them. Here's a preliminary guideline.
And here's why.
We want your input.
And here's why we said it that way,
Right.
because of the levy limit coming up.
So this is excellent work
Now,
that
Lindsay, this
Lindsay
is-
has accomplished here, and whoever else worked with her. And I want to throw out a suggestion that we make Lindsay available to talk to the town or talk to the schools if they have questions.
And Lindsay actually.
She's like,
provides
no.
the job, yes. So I think we should Eric will communicate this
Well, I can throw it out there.
budgeting units, and then let's do it the way we've done it, which is questions will come back to the
Yeah.
chair.
Yeah.
And can be shared with Lindsay, and, I mean, that's a better way.
You're off the hook.
Well, she isn't, but she can manage time a little bit.
Yeah, Colin, you're next, but to that, we haven't even voted yet, so we're getting ahead of the process. But my expectation is whatever we land on tonight, assuming we reach agreement, we'll put together a formal communication to all the budget units, as well as our friends in Carlisle, explaining what it is we've done, and inviting them to provide input by December 16th. So we have time to review it ahead of our December 19th meeting. Colin?
Then you're going to make a decision on the 19th?
The goal is to set the final guideline on the 19th to inform the budgeting process, with an awareness that it may be hard for some of the budgeting units, like the schools, because of the time schedule, to get us as much information as they would like
Gotcha.
to inform the final guidelines, and we'll be aware of that and do our best to accommodate it.
Colin?
I'm getting a feeling that there's a consensus towards this scenario 3 new, which will remove about 1.15 million out of the budget. I think you will get a consensus. It will not be unanimous. I'm not in favor of it, and it's because I think it's too much of a sticker shock. It's not just a stake in the ground, it's a stake in the heart. And I think a more reasonable approach that would take less from the schools, take less from the town, though I must say I'm less concerned about taking money from the town than from the schools, would be a more palatable approach and a more rational approach. So I will not be supporting scenario 3 new.
Can we
Okay.
have some discussion on that? Is that okay?
Yes,
Because
Dawn.
I'd like to ask you, Carlin, because I think we would understand the sentiment very strongly. So that would leave us with 2.5% or so to the levy limit. So at that point, what would you recommend would be our future course of action? Would we, at 2%, draw a line in the sand, or 1%, or would you just let it go to a levy limit override?
I think the levy limit override is inevitable. It's just a matter of whether it'll be in 2028, 29, or 30, because I don't think the town is going to be willing to cut back the spending. I don't see the schools being willing to cut back spending to a point that we will not be using up our levy capacity. So I think we should just be preparing for an override in 2 to 3 to 4 years.
Do you think we have an obligation to try to prevent that?
Absolutely, and that's
Okay.
why I think we should have some reduction below what the schools ask, below what the towns ask. I think this is a little too much, but I think now is the time to, let's see, what's the proper analogy? 2-minute warning before halftime. Jacob Marley at Christmas Carol saying, you've got a chance to make a change. Now's the time to do it, but if you don't, here's what's going to happen.
But if we don't suggest the change, then the town doesn't vote on that change, right?
I think we should be suggesting, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about in the FinCom report. Very good, strong language towards that end, regardless of what guideline we choose. Okay?
And is there another, so would you, would you want to make a modification to that, like the Reed scenario, or would we want to use that as the one you would vote for? At this case, or do you want to make any modification to that?
At this point, I think it's probably not a good use of our time to try and seek any more modifications. I think I can kind of see how this vote's going to go. I think we all can. And it's a rational approach, but it's not going to be a unanimous vote.
I think that I am liking scenario 3, and it is a preliminary guideline, and I think at this point, changes end up being arbitrary. They're us guessing how strongly each of the budgeting units feel about their original ask and how much flexibility they have. Let's put this out there and let them tell us. And then we're actually making a decision informed by information communicated to us by the people who have the information, instead of taking a guess. I think this makes clear what our goal is, which is to begin to meaningfully reduce spending, because we are not finding immediate ways to increase revenue, and taxes have been going up substantially. So let's start this and see what feedback we get from the units, and then, give us an opportunity to be educated.
Paul?
And, I think back to a class I took in business school called negotiation, and the thing that comes back to my mind is the teacher used to say is like, if you haven't been told no enough, or lately, you haven't asked for enough. And this kind of relates to that idea that they're not going to, if we increased the guidance, the answer will be thank you, as opposed to that's too much.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And you can't go backwards. So I hear you, Carlin, I really do. I have kids in school, I have I understand both sides, but at the end of the day, I do think that, it's, you have to play and work together.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I see Pat has her hand up online. Pat?
Bingo. I think the last two comments really hit it home for me. I think we ask a hard landing. They have the right to come back and tell us how it can't be done. It might actually stir some conversation about long-standing policies that the individual budget units have to talk about and haven't been pressed to talk about for decades, to try to figure out how to get poor taxpayers of this town not gouged another, in some instances, 46% increase last year. So I'm in favor of the 2.44%. I'm in favor of the hard landing, and then the discussion, which will be a negotiation, because that's the kind of people we are later on.
Thank you, Pat. Okay. I want to invite a motion, but I want to make sure everybody has been heard. Kathy, you're online. Any comments?
Yes, I'd like to thank folks for putting all of this analysis together. Lindsay, it's really quite comprehensive. I'm in favor of looking at these uncontrollable expenses in a manner, I think the conversation went the full circle. We can take them out, we can try to treat them differently, but then it comes back to how do they get paid and where does the bottom line roost? So I'm all for going forward with this scenario 3 and continuing the dialogue, having a response for our December meeting.
Okay. At this point, I would invite a motion.
I move that we adopt 2.44% as our preliminary guideline, as set out in scenario 3, and ask the chair to communicate that to the budgeting entities.
Second.
3 new.
Yeah,
3 new.
3 new.
3 new.
Second.
Okay. We have a second. Discussion on the motion. Greg?
Again, in the motion, it doesn't say, it just says the 2.44. Is that where we're communicating to all budget entities?
No,
'Cause
it's
I think if we're-
we have to have these individual ones, yeah.
I think if we are gonna take a hard stance on this,
Scenario
we give
3.
everybody the chance to be at the same level, right? Right now, we're saying, hey, CCRSD, you get a little bit of a buy on the 2.44, you can come higher. And
No, I actually
CCRSD.
disagree.
So, I'm throwing it out there, you guys can disagree, that's fine. I'm just throwing it out there that we give everybody the chance to hit that number, because we do have the chance to allocate later, right? So I would advocate yes for this scenario, but 2.44 to every entity.
regardless of the uncontrollable costs.
So how are we gonna communicate?
That's the
That's-
reason.
How are we
for
gonna
That's the
communicate
reason
that
for
to
the
them, right?
difference.
So if you take that out, does it turn into 2.44
Yes,
for
because the
everyone?
underlying.
So we're saying the same thing then?
Yeah, so I'm
Okay.
treating the underlying operating costs and giving them all the same. But because of these other factors, that they become different when you add them, those things that
Is there
you
any way we can
uncontrolled
just
back
take it
in.
out so that we are looking at, you know what I mean, like?
Well,
like-
so it's easy in the town because that's codified.
Yeah,
What's
yeah, yeah.
not subject to guidelines. We're creating a new idea here in the interest of equity to acknowledge that there's not.
So,
But you're
But it has to be under the
Optics,
guideline
right?
budget, so.
And you're talking about optics for because people.
people are
won't
gonna see
under-
this and go, why did you guys do that?
Why did you give
If
money?
you take those
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
out
you
of
have to
there and
explain
you
it.
explain it's
Yeah.
2.44 across the board with those
Well,
out?
it's actually 2.5 or something to their
It's
underlying.
not across the
but it
board, it's
all-
cumulative, or
Yeah.
whatever.
It ends up at 2.44, yeah.
Because the 500.
We have the
right?
500,000.
Comfortable with our communicating this in the form of this spreadsheet with an explanation of the differences? Because when.
I can make this clearer, I can kind of list out
Or
what we did.
We can just do
Yeah.
a narrative paragraph
Yeah. I
that
think
Eric
so,
can
yeah.
put into his cover letter that just explains that there are differences because we are acknowledging the
Right.
unpredictability of out-of-district.
Right, so I just sat through this whole
Yeah,
thing
so
and I
this-
still didn't pick
Yeah,
out that they were all
so
2.44.
So that the
right?
underlying cost increases are right here in the town, 2.56.
Yeah.
What's that?
2.56.
Sorry, I keep
2.56.
saying the number on the
Yeah, and then
2.44.
it ultimately, because of the middle school savings, it's lower than that.
Right, that's what I keep
And
saying.
they're,
so
and they
yes,
differ
that's
by
right.
unit because of those things that are uncontrollable.
Yeah.
So yes, okay. It-
And the CCRSD is most affected by those things.
Right,
So with a narrative explanation of that,
And this grant.
if we amend the motion to make it clear that a narrative explanation will accompany this,
Yeah.
that shows how certain expenses are being treated differently, and certain savings are being treated differently for the schools, does that do it for you?
But I
yeah,
also
mean,
think
it's not, I mean, it's for
the
me,
motion
yes, and
needs
for
to
everybody
include
else,
the
right?
individual guidelines for each one.
And everybody.
Right?
All right.
Because
Well,
we're saying CPS, not including middle school, you have to get to 2.89%.
Okay.
That's what we're saying, right?
Right.
Because
So
we
there
don't
would
want
be-
them to come in back at 2.44.
There would be a
We
couple
want them-
letters going out targeted to the specific audience.
It would have to, yeah, they'd have to
But
be
you could have this scenario 3 chart accompanying it, I think, which would be very helpful to people.
Yeah, my intention is to include this summary chart with an accompanying narrative that's relevant for that budget unit. So I'm going to be sending 3 memos.
Okay, I'm fine if taking that out and putting it back in, they all sort of get the same bar.
Right.
That's fine.
You could also take this table and show the 2.44 in the green line, line 17, and then insert 3 rows below that
Yeah,
per ... and then
Right.
say, summary, guideline. So they would see why there's a difference, right,
Yeah.
on the table.
right. They could
Rather
say
than
the
too much of-
underlying is 2.56, but then you had these other things
Yeah.
that added
And
back
then
Right,
on.
right.
back
It
in.
gets you back to
Right.
2.89.
Or
So
for
I
the
can-
preliminary guidelines, we could leave it at the one number, acknowledging that we had a pretty good intent here, but then we discover, well, there is that circuit breaker.
There's
There are other ways
Yeah.
to deal with that. Maybe we were overthinking this.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
but again, that, we should be taking this to the next step, let the budgeting
Yeah.
entities tell us that.
And also, I think that because we're thinking in the sense of where the budget, at least for the school, is where they're concerned about trying to figure out how to deal with that and mitigate that risk. We're meeting them at that so that they're, I think, a little bit more prone to, work with us on meeting the guideline in other ways. And that really buys a lot of goodwill.
Yeah.
That would be
Like
great.
we fully funded that, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Which is,
Yeah.
we have no choice.
Because we are making an effort to acknowledge the particular circumstances that the budgeting entities are struggling with. And in the case of the schools, they explained to us what the issue is with out-of-district tuitions, and we would really be remiss if we didn't, we asked them to tell us, they told us, and now Lindsay very thoughtfully incorporated into the analysis. That's how that's how we're working with them. That's how we're trying to address a need.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Are we
been
prepared?
seconded.
It's been seconded.
Can you read back?
We've had discussion.
Yep.
Can you read back the motion?
The motion is to approve scenario 3 new as the Finance Committee's preliminary guideline. Roll call.
Peggy Briggs,
Aye.
Kathy Cuocolo,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Garofalo,
Yes.
Pat Geyer,
Yes.
Greg Ariello,
Yes.
me, Don Kupka, yes. Lindsay Liss,
Sorry, I'm having trouble deciding. Can you come back to me?
sure. Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Carlin Reed,
Nay.
Paul Rodriguez,
Yes.
Quasi's not here. Sri Tupel,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
And then Lindsay.
Lindsay Liss.
That guy on.
Oh, Pat Geyer, I think I did.
I think
I
you
did.
got
You did get
You
Pat.
got Pat already.
Yes, you got me. I was a yes.
We were going to give you 2 votes, but okay.
I'm a yes.
So
12 to 1.
the measure passes 1, 2, 3,
Pat 12 to 1.
7, 8, 9, 12 yay, 1
Got it.
no.
And no abstentions. Got it.
And no abstentions.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you, everybody. I'll take it as a next step to prepare those memos to the 3 budget units. My goal will be to get those out by end of day on Monday. I'd like to take a little bit of time just to get it, be precise. In the memo, I'll invite feedback by December 16th so that we have time to review it ahead of our December 19th meeting. And what I'd like to do, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but what I'd like to do is, we have the 3rd of our capital planning meetings with the select board and the schools on December 16th. That's a Monday. I'd like to convene, this isn't on our schedule, so this is new, a quick, regular meeting of the Finance Committee immediately following that capital planning session on Monday, the 16th. So we have some dedicated time to review any of the input we've received. I think trying to cram in review of the feedback and the final vote on the 19th, it's too much. So I'd like to break it into 2 sessions that week. We're going to be meeting anyway, so I think that's the best way to do it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then another thing we're going to try to do is understand the overall tax impact for the median taxpayer using this
Yes.
guideline and, yeah.
That's good.
And build something where maybe we can see the impact if we change the guideline.
Yes.
Yeah. But we'll see if we can get that done.
Good addition.
Lindsay,
Good addition.
Lindsay, one clarification. That's the median assessed value for a single-family residence? Because there's a different value for condos, if you look at the
Oh.
assessor's things. So,
Well, I think we're going to focus, see if we can get the single-family one done.
Good,
Because
good.
it's just a lot of work.
Or just
so.
do the percent increase.
Yeah, we'll just see if we'll see what we
Can
can
we
get done.
also ask Tony to, Anthony, to update update his 5-year budget forecast, which the underlying spreadsheets all had 4%.
Yeah, we
And
can,
update that with the guideline number. And then we'll be able to see when it turns to red.
How much time we're buying potential.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just the beginning of that process.
I'm going to take the ball back. That's all right.
oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay, back to our agenda.
Oh,
This is a great discussion, and this is important stuff, so we went over, but I think that's okay. We are on to item number 4, which is Finance Committee's policies. This is an item we added to the agenda at Dawn's suggestion at our last meeting. It came up in the context of free cash and the unused levy capacity. Wanted to have a discussion about if and how we document Finance Committee policies on these items and anything else we want to put into the mix. Dawn, it was your suggestion, so I'll turn it over to you to articulate what you had in mind.
Thank you. I think this is wonderful timing to have this conversation, and I think that having policy would serve town meeting well because we could then point to it. And I was thinking of sort of a red, yellow, green idea where we could say we're in the red zone or we're in the yellow zone. I think that might get more attention from the citizens at town meeting. I guess prior to a couple of weeks ago, I didn't realize how close we are to the levy limit. We really are a hair's breadth away. Certainly, as we think about a policy, I think we need to keep in mind that there will be a recession at some point, and we would like to be able to maintain level services within this town, and that will require some levy limit capacity as well as some free cash. And so we have to not just assume that we can always have available funds to replenish and to overspend, if you will. So with that in mind, I was thinking of a policy along the lines of that Finance Committee policy that says that the minimum level of free cash is $6 million. That may be too low for a minimum. I know that we've talked of 5 before, but the budget keeps growing, and 5 isn't what it used to be. And that anything below 9 would be a yellow zone in my mind, and we wouldn't consider expenditure of free cash if we had less than that. And again, I'm thinking of a recession.
Are you talking about dollars or percent?
Dollars.
Okay,
Dollars.
sorry.
Yeah. We could also do it in terms of percentage of the budget, and then it'd be more durable.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Roughly the same numbers.
It is roughly.
5 and
yeah.
9.
Right
Yeah,
now.
yep. And then within excess levy capacity, I've been wrestling in my mind during this meeting even, what that should be. We're at 3.3%, which is just a couple of $1 million. I think we probably are on the line of the red zone, and when we might say 3.3 and below is red, and up to 6.6 is yellow, and above that we're in the green. I don't know, just for discussion.
Just two thoughts. I think it's only 2, but I may lose count. First of all, I very much think we should be thinking in terms of percentages.
Yeah.
And there are external forces at work. There are percentages that best practices require of us. Anthony can speak to that.
Your policy right now says 5%.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what is the current policies for the funds?
5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm leery about the excess levy capacity. You want to set out best practices, but you don't want to tie the hands of future town officials, future finance committees potentially, but we don't really make these decisions. You don't want to make it harder to react to circumstances that can change dramatically. So I'm a little nervous about being too proscriptive. But having said that, there's one thing I'd like to add, which I will not claim is original. It's come up in some conversations that Eric and I had, and something that Anthony said. We know these big freight trains are coming down the track, these big expenditures, a lot of exempt borrowing potentially to do some major projects. One use we should be thinking about, and something we might want to have a policy about, is setting up stabilization funds, where we do have enough cash over and above what in the circumstances that we're in that moment, feels like
Yeah.
an appropriate reserve fund, we might want to have that in a policy, because A, it's good practice, it's going to help us out tremendously as the interest hits for the middle school borrowing, that we set the stabilization fund up. A few years ago, we funded it, it's there, it's going to smooth that curve, and actually, other things will be driving taxes up, but it will make it better. So we want to give ourselves the ability to do that with other anticipated expenses. It also puts a stake in the ground, because there's a lot of eyes on free cash. A lot of worthy causes and constituencies that are looking at free cash. And if we've established as a town priority funding stabilization funds for specific purposes, we may be able to avoid some of those wrestling matches over the extra $1 million or $2 million by making it clear that that money hasn't been specifically allocated yet, but there is an intention to allocate it for those purposes. So I'd like that to be factored.
One thought about stabilizations, and you're thinking about how they're going to be spent, think about who actually benefits from the use of that stabilization fund. For example, if you use it to offset property taxes, that will benefit 3/4 of our residents, but will not benefit the quarter that rent or don't pay property taxes. So think about that aspect as well.
Okay. Dee and then Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, rather than a policy, to have maybe an FY25, FY26 practices, finance committee practices.
It's not us.
You never know what's going to be happening going forward, and I think if we just look at it as in the upcoming couple of years, and it's just a semantics, policies versus practices.
Guidelines.
Well, not guidelines, no, I don't like that word, but practices, it's really financial, the finance committee practices.
Paul.
I really like Lois' idea about creating stabilization funds, but I think we'd have to have the mindset also that we don't know what we don't know, and we wouldn't want to remove the flexibility that free cash allows for the unknown situation that we have to be flexible enough to deal with. So, but it removes the moniker that, hey, there's a pile of free cash somewhere that we can find. So just a level of caution, I guess, in not making it so rigid that we can't deal with the unknown future.
I don't see any more hands at the moment, so I'll just respond, I think, to Lois. I hadn't thought of this in any way tying anyone's hands, but to say we're in a red state or yellow or green position relative to the lower bound, but we could, somebody could willfully go deeper into the red state, right, or approach that zero bound, and that would be fine. I mean, I'm a little disappointed it's in my third year, and I didn't realize how close we are to it. So I would like to escalate it and have it be more visible, and so that's really the intent of this.
I like giving it a grade.
Yeah, giving it a grade. It's giving it a grade, yeah.
I think that's a good idea. I have one process point. This is the kind of thing that a committee of 15 people cannot do. So, and I'm not suggesting we cut off the discussion just because it's 8:45, but I think this is the kind of task that is best accomplished with a small subcommittee of just 2 or 3 people that work on a document and then bring it back for further discussion. So I just want to propose that as an idea.
I think that's a great suggestion, Lois. Greg.
Yeah, I was only going to comment. You can't make a decision, or at least I can't make a decision without any impacts of these policies from the outside bond rating, whatever, you know what I mean, whatever it may be, right? Rather than us just going, this. We can do the grading thing, 5%, 10%, that stuff. But I don't think we can do policies without some external data from Anthony.
Yeah, okay,
I agree with Greg, yeah.
okay. Colin?
If you're going to make it a subcommittee has to have an agenda posted for meetings, as opposed to one person who's responsible. Work group, subcommittee, doesn't matter what you call it. If you call it more than one person for a task, then you have to have it posted. What you could do as an alternative is assign one person, and if that person wants to get some help, he or she can ask for it.
Yeah, you can have
Thank you, Colin.
a group of
Thank you.
I guess I was under the impression that we sort of had a policy. No lower than 5%, target 10%, 7.5 to 8 or 9, perfect. I just thought we always operated that way.
I had the same impression
Yeah.
too.
Then I suggest we distribute the policies to the FinCom members, because I wasn't aware.
I'm not
I don't
aware.
think it's
Because we
in writing.
talked about it when we went down to like 5-6 million, what was it, 2 years?
Yeah.
2 years ago, we were like, we are dipping down way to.
Well, but
our
that wasn't-
policy-
that
He
wasn't-
said our policy, and at the time, I remember saying, our
I
policy
don't
says
think we
we
have-
shouldn't go that low.
I guess my point is that wasn't very,
Oh, I totally get
Yeah.
that. Yes, totally get that.
Anthony, and then I want to,
Training manual.
Anthony, and then contingent on what you have to say, I want to try to wrap this up.
Just as a recommendation, because I would think what really worked well was, an example was the pilot policy that we just developed. We had Lois sat on that, Mary Hartman sat on that with Kerry, myself, and the assessor. Obviously on this one, the assessor played a big part in a pilot policy. So perhaps a working group like that, because I think if we're gonna have financial policies like this, I think the select board should weigh in and be in agreement with the FinCom.
Okay, I do see Pat. Pat, did you have something to add? I see you had your hand up.
Anthony just said it. I wanted to open it up to more than just FinCom. Thank you, Anthony.
Okay. So to me, it sounds like there's two pieces to this. There's a research piece, to Greg's point, what already exists. I'm with Dawn. I wasn't necessarily aware that we even had policies this specific. So there's the first question, what already exists? Because a lot of this work may already be done. It's just a matter of tracking these things down. And then the second piece is putting in writing any new policies, or I suppose revising existing policies to align with our current priorities. I do think a work group makes sense. Lois, I think you're exactly right. We don't have the agenda capacity, frankly, to, as a full committee, take this on. To Colin's point, I'm not 100% sure what the next steps process-wise are for setting up a work group. I want to make sure we do that in compliance with whatever the requirements are. So Anthony, maybe you and I can take that as a next step, understand what it is we need to do to set up a work group in collaboration with the select board and the staff, and get this off the ground.
Sure. Yep.
Is that acceptable, Dawn?
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Very good.
We'll aim to have that sorted out by our next meeting, which is December 16th. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the Finance Committee's report to town meeting for fiscal year 26, our annual report.
Yep.
Dawn.
So I wonder if I could share my screen. Yeah.
I think you should be able to. Can you?
I don't think he's promoted it. Are
Oh,
you in Zoom?
are you?
Oh, you got
You know what? I'm going to need a minute. Is this the last agenda item?
No.
If there's something else you can do, because I have to log into Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
And the link's at the top of the.
Why don't we skip ahead to liaison report? Thanks, everybody, for your submissions to the liaison report. Another very thorough report. Any clarifying questions or late additions to the report? We'll stop. Peggy had her hand up first, and then Colin.
Yeah, I haven't been having reports because the Rec Commission is down one person and one person is generally unable to attend, so they have a real quorum problem. And they haven't met since last summer. So, talk to the chair, that's all he had to say.
Okay. You're off the hook. Colin.
Thanks for that assignment, by the way. Carolyn.
Yeah, you got an easy one. This is a question for a Shri Planning Board. They have a couple warrant articles that they're working on. Do either of those warrant articles have any FinCom interest? Should we pay attention to them?
No, I don't believe so. As far as the last meeting.
Okay.
So I didn't get into it, but the next meeting is 2 weeks away.
Okay, if something rings bells, let us know, because I'm assuming, that's my read too, that it's not FinCom material for those two warrant articles? We've got enough to talk about.
They're not.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
Okay.
One quick thing.
Yes.
The next housing roundtable is December 10th, and I can't attend. They're very useful because they bring together all of the different entities in town that are involved with affordable housing, which is another place where a lot of money ends up being allocated, public funds can end up being allocated. So I would love it if someone else could volunteer to attend, maybe Colin.
Yeah, I'll be one of several there. December 10, 5 p.m. by Zoom.
By Zoom, exactly. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, sure.
I hate missing those meetings because they're actually very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. That's liaison report. One other quick item before we go back to the annual report, correspondence. Anthony, you may have other things, but one piece of correspondence that was included in the packets was a copy of a letter that I received. It was addressed to me as well as the entire committee, so I wanted to make sure everybody saw it. It's unsigned from a resident who was expressing concern about his or her tax bill, the increases that this person's household is seeing in their tax bill. So no response. We're not able to respond because it's unsigned, but I just wanted to flag it again because it's addressed to the entire committee. Was there any other correspondence, Anthony?
I didn't have anything in the packet. No, nothing.
Okay. Thank you.
One other thing on on the agenda, at the bottom, it has Thursday, December 18th. It's really the 19th.
Yes. Small,
I know.
small issue there. Yes, the two upcoming meetings are going to be Monday the 16th, and like I said, we're going to make that a double header. It's going to be the joint capital planning meeting, and then immediately after that, a regular finance committee meeting in this room, and then Thursday the 19th will be the regular meeting where we vote on the final guideline. Don, are you all set?
I am still getting to Zoom here. Let's see if this works.
You go to the town website, you can
Yeah.
grab the agenda.
The report is posted on the website.
No, I clicked on the link. All right, now it says joining webinar. Good.
I see it, Don. Give me a sec.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Should be going up. Oh, you declined.
Oh, sorry.
I can't do much with that.
Yeah, I'm trying, yeah, thanks. There. Did that do it?
Yeah, you're muted.
Okay, thanks. All right, great.
I did the same.
So, thank you. Share.
No, just getting my things together because we're finished with
Share screen.
And the minutes are signed.
What?
FinCom report. You're not going anywhere.
And, okay, so while I'm bringing this up, the purpose of this is working on the content for the, not showing up, huh? Of the content. And I want to discuss, well, first I want your input on what changes you'd like to see to the FinCom report, and then I want to show you some changes that I have been working on and get some feedback on them. Share. All right, it says I'm sharing. Okay, there we go. So that's the table of contents, and again, I want to listen to what you have to say, but I guess I'll start by talking. I'd like to reorder this document so that there's we don't bury the headline, if you will. I looked at this and realized, gee, we have our 5-year tax projections and trends and challenges, in it a few pages, 7 and 10 pages in. And those are highlighted in green on this. And then we have Finance Committee responsibilities and approach to budgeting up there before those. I'd like to move them down, maybe into the appendix.
Sure, why not?
And create a new section at the beginning called Cost of Concord that would have these trends in the taxes and the services and the enterprise funds. And that would be a more holistic approach to it. So that's one thing. And then the other is that we always include our recommendations on finance-related articles in a thoughtful way in a table in the report. I'd like to also make a handout that can be like a 1 or 2 pager that goes on the table at town meeting, so that people who don't bring the Finance Committee report with them can have the benefit of knowing where we stand. Make it pretty short.
That's a really good idea, because sometimes there are updates.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's, well, for example, the year that we came to a deal with the schools.
Yeah.
Before they found some money in one budget to cover the other. Things like that do happen.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to plan for that and update it and have a handout. I totally agree with that.
So another thing I would like to do is bring more of the enterprise funds into the picture. And I made this table just from 2024 budgets. We have, I just want to spell out for people that the schools and the town services are paid for by the property taxes, and all the rest that the town does is paid for with other bills. And we'll be adding another one to this long list. And I went through the total numbers, got into the assessor's information, and then all the budgets for all of the enterprise funds. And I was kind of surprised to find that the enterprise fund budgets per user of the fund is almost 50% of the tax bill. It's certainly at the median level of taxes. So that prompted this graphic that it's a work in process, but it shows 2020, the tax bill plus the services costs, which I haven't calculated yet. I've only calculated the services costs for 2024. But the cost of Concord, meaning the whole cost of living in your house in Concord. And I want to drive home that we're having 12.5% increases annually in the water service bill, for example. Even before MCI, this is just these things have been going up radically. Yeah, and yet it gets no airtime really. And what I'm showing in this slide, I think, would be a lot easier for somebody to grasp than a table or a chart. And it's that from 20 to 24, we've seen a 26% increase in the cost of Concord. And then I'd like to forecast what do we see from 25 to 29. Let's put it forward in an easy to understand way.
Just explain what does cost of Concord mean to you?
Go back. So
Well, that's
Is this
I want
like an
Don to-
electric bill, telecom bill?
yeah, it's all the services and things that the town provides. It's the fire, the police, the road maintenance.
Yeah, just make that clear.
Yes,
in your.
I will. No, I'm for each of these, I'm going to go into say
Like
this is what that is.
Cost of living in Concord?
No, it's the cost of it's what we spend. What
we spend,
what we
right?
spend as town residents
Concord,
that the
which is
town
cost.
collects.
And bills?
Yes.
So like your light bill, your
Yes.
electric bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of these would be very similar in another town. Like you'd
Yes.
still have the electric bill in another town.
You
I'm
would.
just saying-
Concord's much higher.
But it wouldn't be.
Concord's about
comparable,
30%
yeah.
higher than others, but this doesn't even get into
Okay.
that. This is
Right.
just being light
right.
to the whole, what is our
Yeah, and I
spend.
guess in any town you'd have all these things, so they'd just be different, yeah.
You'd always have the police and fire and schools, but your taxes might be a few thousand less or whatever, I don't know, you know, yeah. So to your point, Greg, I would, with each of these things, then say, that, you know, I want to bring it down to, this is the road maintenance, but not in a table or something, but just in a, you know, high level. And I was thinking too that I'd like to round the numbers so that it's not implied accuracy here. Okay, Carlin, I see your hand.
Okay.
Hang on, Colin. I see Kathy had her hand up
Yeah,
first. So
she
we'll go
beat me.
Kathy,
Go
then
ahead, Kathy.
Colin.
Yeah, if you could go back to that page with the graphic that starts, so it looks to me like the number goes from 16,000 roughly to 26,000?
Kathy, I haven't calculated the services cost. This is a conceptual diagram right now. 24, I have done the services
Okay,
for.
the reason I was pointing that out is that the difference between 16 and 26 is a lot more than 26%.
It is. The 26 was actually just the taxes. The services will actually I think we'll make it even a bigger number because we have had such big increases for so many years in the services. But let's just say it's in this order of magnitude for the time being, and this is a draft. But I wanted to get some feedback before I go too far with this. Yeah.
Colin, and then Paul.
Okay, you're going to have to be really careful about your estimates. The telecom fund, for example, that's broadband. That has 1,700 subscribers. That is about a third of the town. Your sewer fund is not paid by a third of the town. So you'll have to make some qualifications or some estimates of what sector this is or how accurate it's going to be.
But nobody lives in this house. This isn't a real house. This is a median. So this is all, I'm not intending to tell people what they actually spend, but to give a sense of the increase over time.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of items on that, I'm following up on Carlin, that are really optional. So, do you belong to the BD Center? You know, do you use the town solid waste program? Do you, you know, buy your internet from the town or not? And it's really apples and oranges compared to the tax bill. I mean, maybe light and water and sewer. Now, sewer, half the town is not on sewer. More than half the town is not on sewer. So, the difference between taxes and all of those enterprise funds is, whether it's true or not, people feel they have the option to lower their cost by reducing their usage. And that's important. Now, whether or not we have the highest rates in the light fund, I don't think we do, but it's been creeping up due to some of the green elements that are required. But I don't really think it's fair to spread that over all the households and assume.
I haven't. I've only done it by the number of people actually using the service. So I took the cost of the water and divided by the subscribers to the water service, and the sewer and divided by the sewer service users.
Paul, and then Anthony.
So,
and then Lindsay.
As a concept of identifying that in saying you can't limitlessly increase taxes, you can't, like, there are other aspects in your bills that fund the town. I appreciate the concept that it kind of speaks to the idea that it's complicated and there are a lot of aspects to your bills that feed the operations that go through the town. So if it's communicated in a way that becomes palatable to not have as many exceptions, which maybe you don't necessarily give all of that detail, but speak to generalities associated with, here's an example of all the things that, you know, in general people pay into.
That's it, yeah, right.
And this is like, your taxes are included, but also, you know, the water, the electricity, all these other things, and, you know, those are all going up too, so we can't assume that taxes can go up forever. You know, that I like the idea.
Anthony.
You know, I just wanted to bring up one point. Well, you don't necessarily opine on those budgets. You know, there are other regulatory boards that set those rates that determine how they pay for the budget. So I would just be, you know, I think it's something that you should consider because you're affecting other boards and just, well, it's not, I understand what you're trying to do. There might be something to think about.
But we have hearings on those budgets.
Yeah,
We are supposed to opine. It's in our charge, actually. I went back to the 1970 charge for FinCom, which was how I knew it didn't say anything about level services. And it says we're supposed to opine on those. Yeah.
Okay, Lois and then Lindsay.
I think we need to be really careful with this, Don. I really do. I'm not, there are so many qualifiers to it, and so much of it is really arguably out of our jurisdiction, that, and I'm not sure that I understand exactly the point you're making. If you want to make the point that the taxes are going up and they're not the only expenses that you incur living in town, make the point, but do it in a narrative where it's understandable rather than in a graphic where it's going to be really confusing. I'm uncomfortable with this.
Okay.
Okay, Lindsay.
And I like it, and I would prefer the detailed view over the simple view, just because of the nuances around who pays for what, and I think that trend is more important than, or is almost the most important thing, so kind of showing,
Yep.
The CAGR over, the last 5 years, and then that projected CAGR, I think is helpful.
Good. Yeah.
I think it's just broadly great to get creative with the report. We do have to, there are specific things we need to accomplish with the report. We're supposed to give an overall status report on the financial condition of the town, summarize our guidelines, summarize our tax projection. But beyond that, we have discretion in terms of what it is we communicate to the taxpayers, and this is, I think, perfectly appropriate. We can go back and forth on the caveating and the formatting and so forth, but I think it's great to get creative on it.
Again, turning back to 1970 when the FinCom was created, I guess, they did say we're supposed to also report to the town on the status of reserves and our, some of the language perhaps is dated, but I think everything we're doing, yeah. We're supposed to hold hearings on all of these budget entities, and I think we do, and then we put a recommendation to approve them, but I don't think that we are doing as much as we could be doing to help the citizens to be prepared for what's coming, especially with the water and sewer. I think that's probably the biggest. And to your point, Peggy, that's not.
And don't the stormwater. Let's not forget the stormwater.
Well, that's actually, thank you, Lois. You and I have had some disagreement on this point, but that's what got me started thinking about this. Because if we take money out of the general budget and put it into enterprise funds,
It's free for all.
it's, yeah.
Well, I'm going to throw something out there, which is, I think that you have a great idea about trying to convey information to the public about the cost. And I'm thinking, why not present it as a slideshow at town meeting, almost like a Q&A, and inform people of the cost of the town, but in not in a more serious way than what I think is going to result from this. I'd rather see something that's a little dynamic and get people to say, oh, yeah, okay, how much does it cost, to have the swimming pool?
Yeah, a couple of points, because I was gonna say something like that, like another column could be, FY '26 warrant articles and then what it.
Yes,
right?
yes.
I think that's probably what you were
Yeah,
planning.
it is.
But then, one other comment, have you isolated residential versus commercial in some of this? Because that life fund one, that looks kind of high. I'm wondering if we should just try to isolate residential customers who probably use a lot less than commercial.
Yeah, I had this exact same thought. I went through and took out all of the buildings I could identify as commercial. So
okay.
Emerson Hospital, et cetera.
All three of them?
Okay,
No, yeah, right.
okay, so you did that.
The prison.
Yeah, but
Oh,
there's,
okay.
yeah,
I know,
Okay.
right?
Oh,
Okay.
That's great, that's great.
Try to,
All right,
yeah.
sorry.
Anyone else on the report?
I think it's a great idea to
Well, and-
really, Mix it up.
I think we've already gone over the 5 minutes I'd asked for this, but if you have any suggestions, any ideas, things you'd like to see changed or emphasized, let me know. Thanks.
You do all
Okay.
at the town meeting, you'll go over the 5 minutes there, too.
Yeah, true. I know, and it's already a marathon.
Okay, let me quickly recap our action items, and then I think we're ready to adjourn. Memos summarizing our vote on the preliminary guidelines. I'll take the lead on those with the goal of getting them out the door by end of day on Monday. Next meeting, I'll work with Anthony to get that December 16th regular meeting on the books, so we can review any feedback and input we get on the preliminary guidelines. The policy work group process, I'll work with Anthony to understand how to get that set up in compliance with the requirements that Colin flagged. I'll bring the outcome of that to our December 16th meeting. And then Dawn, this was implicit in what we just covered, you'll continue to work on mocking up the annual report. I think it's great that you get started on it so early. Okay.
And then Anthony and I are going to work on the tax impact.
Oh, yeah.
section.
Thank you. And your goal is to bring that to the December 16th meeting?
Yeah, with some kind of way to, adjust it based on, what we decide on the guideline.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Okay, roll call.
Yeah, we're going to have to go through the roll. Peggy Briggs.
Aye,
Hold on, I've lost
I
my,
am leaving.
I am leaving.
I just missed my dinner date, so I might as well go home.
Kathy Quoklo,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Pat Geyer,
Yes.
Greg Ariello.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Lindsay Liss.
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Carlin Reed,
Aye.
Paul Rodriguez,
Yes.
Sri Tupel,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Great meeting.
At 9.